quickly, as that obviously what the channel covers. A number of topics on my list that I wanted to get to, a number of things that I'm sure you will be interested to have a bit of a debate about, back and forth, as always, taking your questions at various points as well. But there was obviously the Deontay Wilder fight last weekend. We'll cover that. We've got a big fight coming up in a week. Anthony Joshua and obviously Andy Ruiz Jr. will have their rematch. And Dillian Whyte added to the card. We've got a couple of fights this weekend, a card in Monaco where a couple of decent fights. There's actually, apart from that, not a lot doing in the heavyweight division this weekend. Very similar to a number of other weekends. It seems to be few and far between for stacked weekends of heavyweight action. But next weekend, December the 7th, 5 fights on that card. There's also Aslanbek Makhmudov. He'll be back in a week as well. A couple of other things we'll cover today. Robert Helenius, he's back in action this weekend. Cash Ali, Guido Vianello, the prospect. Jared Anderson, the prospect, also on the same card. Cassius Chaney had a win this weekend. And so we'll crack into the first of the topics. I'll just see if, we've finally got the chat going. There was a bit of a delay of about a minute or so before things kicked in, so I wasn't exactly sure if I was talking to no one or anyone. So we've got JPK World, Alex, hello to you, the Quags, AZ, Bacon and Eggs, Mick07, Liam, Tim, Chris, hello and welcome one and all. So we'll start off, I think, with a bit of a look back at last weekend's fight, Deontay Wilder and Luis Ortiz. Obviously, it kind of went to script. I mean, I know that there was a late surge in interest in the fight. I think more from boxing fans. I think it's one of these sort of things that you're deep down, you're a boxing fan, and while you may not necessarily, feel excited 100% of the time about recycled fights, when those fights come up and they creep closer, and especially as there's a little bit of promotion pushing the underdog, it does sort of get you more up. And I'm the same as well. That on fight day, I start to get a little bit nervous about when you watch a big sporting event and you feel a certain way, a little bit of nerves about the event, what may happen, that sort of thing. And, it ended up being a pretty decent event overall. Deontay Wilder defends his belt for a 10th time, joining Muhammad Ali. Obviously, there'll be the debate about the quality of opposition and whether they deserve to be in the same conversation. But you can't argue. Deontay Wilder is effective. He knocked out Luis Ortiz with a beautiful straight right hand right down the pipe. It sort of not suckered Luis Ortiz into it. He barely threw it in the fight, working the left hand predominantly, and when he found his opportunity, didn't waste it. Luis Ortiz taken out of there. And I have seen a bit of commentary around the place by disgruntled fans who seem to think it was a fast count and people are all bent out of shape, and Luis Ortiz as well. I actually went back and I timed it, and I did like a 10 count myself, and bearing in mind a 10 count is not necessarily start the stopwatch. It's the referee 1, 2, so it's not necessarily 10 seconds, but I got to like 13 and I'm like, I thought watching it live that Ortiz, when he made it to his, he got up but he couldn't stand up. The referee on 9 hesitated, giving Luis Ortiz an opportunity to get up, but when it was obvious he was still struggling, he waved it off. So I didn't have any issue with it. But let me know what you thought about that and what you thought about the fight. I'll just dip into the chat here and we'll get things going with a couple of comments here. So Abdulihai says, well done Boxing Squared. Thanks. I'm not sure what well done for, but thank you for that. Shane Jordan says, you need something on your screen, and what's the glass? Not exactly sure. I mean, I'm still navigating my way with this is Streamlabs technology, OBS. I've still got to work it all out. I'm sort of just feeling my way through to Christmas, and I'll probably reassess after the new year. I'm not the most technically inclined. I mean, once I get the skill, I'm fine. It's sort of like some of the editing software I've got. But something like this and a whole thing, it's going to take a little while for me to sort of click onto these things. So UK Rob is in the building, and if you don't follow his channel, please do so. Mixed Combat Radio, they do some great live streams, some very good content over there. King Frisbee says, where do you think Deontay go if he beats Tyson? Well, immediately after that, I mean, it depends, I guess, what happens on December 7th, because if Andy Ruiz Jr. wins, he probably ends up having his mandatory against Kubrat Pulev or Alexander Usyk at some point. And if there is a unit, so it's not just going to be, I don't think, that Andy Ruiz Jr. will wait, because he won't be allowed to wait by the sanctioning bodies. So if he wins, he'll have to have at least one fight before he could unify with Deontay Wilder. And I know people sort of go, oh, it's unification, Trump's mandatory and that sort of stuff, but they've made an order. It's already locked in now. So Kubrat Pulev, the clock is ticking on his title shot, has to happen before the end of May. And with Wilder and Fury, set to fight in February, Andy Ruiz Jr., if he beats Josh, would have to do something, and that would mean fulfilling a mandatory obligation. There's been a bit of talk that he may drop the IBF. Obviously, a lot of talk and speculation he may drop the WBO. But it depends, I guess, can you work out deals? Does he want to keep either of them, or both of them? It really depends how things fall. And if Anthony Joshua beats Andy Ruiz Jr., well, I mean, I'm trying to get back to the original question now. So I guess it could be Andy Ruiz Jr. That's where we were going. Wilder, what if he beats Tyson Fury? But if I was to pick, and there would be a voluntary if Wilder won, well, it's probably going to be Adam Kovnatsky. The PBC has had him sitting on the shelf waiting for a title shot. They've primed him with certain fights to build his profile, his name. He's got a few decent wins, and then obviously they're just keeping him busy at the moment until he gets a shot at a title. And there has been talk, and I did a video on this, that if the IBF title was vacated by Andy Ruiz Jr., he decided to drop that one. That under discussion is a potential Kubrat Pulev and Adam Kovnatsky fight. They are the two highest ranked contenders in the IBF. And the video on that, I must have had about 30 comments, and this is because people don't watch the video and listen to the content sometimes. It was a case of, if there's a vacant title, if that's on the line, Kubrat Pulev being the mandatory challenger and then the next highest ranked contender, they'd be ordered to fight. That's just how it would go. So I had a lot of comments saying Kubrat Pulev would never take that fight. He'll just wait for his title shot. But that would be the title shot. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of ifs, buts and maybes, and some of it will be dependent on December 7th. But if Wilder beats Fury, and say Joshua beats Ruiz, probably the most logical next fight would be Adam Kovnatsky for Deontay Wilder. But who knows? I mean, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, it's a long time in the heavyweight division. I mean, you think about what was happening earlier this year, say 10 months ago. I mean, I don't think Tyson Fury had even signed for Top Rank by that point. So we'll see what happens. Okay, I'll just get back to the comments here. It goes so fast. So, 31 in the building here, so if you could smash that like button, that would be much appreciated. So Mick says, morning from Glasgow. Hello to you. Hello to Bacon and Eggs. We've also got, I think I've been through some of this actually, Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News. John Doe, hello to you too. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says he has not equaled Ali. All defences were undisputed. The Quags says nope. Sammy Long says, I didn't get excited about Wilder vs Ortiz until it started. In the end, I enjoyed the fight. I think there were a lot of fans who were like that. That, the fight comes along, you may not be necessarily jazzed, but there's just something, you don't want to miss it just in case there was something that could happen. And as it turned out, Luis Ortiz, he had a good fight, good game plan. It worked well until it didn't. Deontay Wilder, was pretty emphatic with that knockout. So L-Dog says Wilder must have done some pretty poor numbers. Hard to say. I know UK Rob, who's in the building here, he did share some of those Fox prelim numbers with me just via Twitter, sort of alerting me to them. I think, what was it, 141,000 watched the prelim, and that was much lower than some other recent Fox pay-per-view events in terms of the prelim numbers, which could be an indicator of the overall pay-per-view. I mean, initially I sort of thought this one would do 200 to 250,000. Fox really threw everything at that. I thought they did a really good job of promoting the fight, and they really did build a bit of hype and buzz for it, considering it was a retread fight that ended pretty conclusively the first time around with a knockout. So I thought they did a good job. Whether it does big pay-per-view numbers is, that really is the question, because it's not cheap in America. But we'll have to see what happens. But if it does anything like 300,000, I actually think that's probably actually okay, given the circumstances around the fight. And that would be an indication that Fox, probably on the back of the work that they put in, has, sort of just managed to increase the numbers a bit. But we'll see, because sometimes the numbers can be deceptive, because obviously the Fight Camp episodes, they were getting 2 million, 2.4 million per episode, people watching it. But obviously free TV versus, a pay-per-view. Sometimes, you don't want to put your hand in your pocket. So we'll see there. So JPK World says Wilder vs Ortiz was interesting. Ortiz boxed very well, then switched off for 1 second and ended up on his bum. Wilder hits hard, but I want to see him fight someone else that hits hard like AJ. Well, it's sort of coming to that nub, the sort of crunch time in Deontay Wilder's career. Obviously, the slow burn with his earlier career, the championship, the first half of his championship run, or should we say 2015 to 2017. He was still, an evolving fighter, an improving fighter. They, were matching him relatively carefully. And as a result, interest in him didn't really sort of build to the level that Wilder thought it should be at. But 2018 onwards, he has really sort of hit the go button in terms of opposition. And you can't really drop down too far. You have to effectively be facing the best contenders around. So the next 2 years, if Wilder continues to win, it will be against relatively good opposition. So L-Dog says, smash the like button. Yes, please. That would be great. Wilder needs to beat Fury to make his resume relevant. Well, arguably, with his resume at the moment, when you consider he's got 10 defences, the Berman-Stefan win, to win the belt, and then 10 defences, which is 9 wins and 1 draw, that draw being with Fury. And 2 wins against Luis Ortiz and a draw against Tyson Fury. And the other stuff, which I always describe as sort of middling meat type opposition, it's actually not a bad resume. It's one of the strongest resumes in the heavyweight division. But arguably, as a champion, is it the strongest opposition he could have faced? Certainly not in those early years of the championship run. But yeah, I think his resume, when you stack it up against the other top guys in the heavyweight division, it's it's all kind of washes together relatively okay. But, if he wants to be an all-time great, as he claims he already is, he needs some, signature wins on his record. So Salty Sally says her dad was fancying Luis Ortiz. Then Wilder landed that right hand and he walked straight out the door without saying a word. Oh, that's classic. So Main Event Boxing Talk says, Boxing Squared, you should stick to rugby league. Boxing is not for you. Okay, why don't you just jog on then, you knob? Right Hook Boxing says, a good day all. Scott70 says, at Right Hook Boxing, and if you haven't followed Right Hook Boxing, do go subscribe to his channel. And actually, if one of the moderators, can you take care of Main Event Boxing Talk? I want him out of the chat, just ban him. Baz Halliday says, a glass full of babies. Alrighty then. UK Rob says Adam Kovnatsky is potentially facing Pulev on the Wilder Fury 2 card. Well, we were just talking about that before. We'll have to see what happens. There's too many ifs, buts, and maybes about what's happening there. James says, is there any news on Parker's next opponent? Not as yet. It's going to be the new year, so we'll have to see. If they do line something up, maybe an announcement in December, but if not, I don't know. So Baz says Wilder Ortiz was poor. Ortiz had 3 to 4 tentative raids per round. Wilder was awful until. See, I didn't necessarily think Deontay Wilder was awful. I thought he was being patient. He didn't want to overcommit to anything, but also he didn't want to, give Luis Ortiz opportunities to counter. If you followed some of my pre-fight predictions on that, on the event, it actually panned out how I was expecting. I thought it would be pretty low volume until it heated up, and then something would happen. So John says, good morning, Boxing Squared, my favourite boxing channel. Do you think Huey Fury and Zhili Zhang will get stoppage wins this weekend against their respective opponents? Thanks again, John. We will come to that in a few minutes. I'll just quickly make my way down the chat, and we'll get to that. That is on my list to cover. So we've got 50 in the building. Thank you one and all for joining, except Main Event Boxing Talk. You can jog on. L Dog, make sure to hit the like and the bell icons, guys. Giving it the big one there, L Dog. Thank you for that. Cash says, "Hi Boxing Squared from Bangkok. Your live streams thumbs up." Thank you very much for listening. Wherever you are in the world, thank you, except Main Event Boxing Talk. Jog on. Darren Newton says he's knocked one top 10 guy out. Well, I guess in the context of when he fought them, I mean, Berman Stavern at the time he fought him in terms of a knockout, or are you talking a win? Berman Stavern was rated top 10. And I'm not here to just, be the defender of Deontay Wilder's record, but some of the rhetoric sometimes is, it does try to minimize some of the guys that he faced. I mean, we have to remember at certain points fighters were relevant in the heavyweight division, like Berman Stavern was the champion at the time Deontay Wilder beat him, so you have to give him that credit for that win. That was his best win until Luis Ortiz. So Jason Landis says Wilder is a fake and I cannot believe people are drinking the Kool-Aid. Well, he's still got more to do. UK Rob says, "I'm told that FS2 is a shitty channel to find on US cable boxes." Well, if that is sort of a red herring regarding the prelims, well, it'll be interesting because obviously that could be explained away. But if there is other data that suggests that other events that were on pay-per-view had similar, prelims that were on the same channel, it becomes harder to sort of say, well, it was hard to find. But, normally it comes, a week and a half after the event, so not too long before we get the numbers for that pay-per-view. So L-Dog says, according to Bob Arum, pay-per-view is really suffering. He said Crawford Khan and Spence Porter both did under 150 buys. Hard to see Wilder doing above 200. Well, sometimes it comes down to, you can't just put a fight on that no one wants to see. I mean, no one was really calling for Crawford and Khan to fight. So the fact that it did 150,000 buys, it's not surprising. Sam says Wilder was waiting to throw a successful right hand, but you could see the worry on his face every time Ortiz outboxed him. I guess that's the thing. I mean, he obviously knew Ortiz from the first fight, what he was likely to do if he gave him the opportunity to counter, try to take some of those away, and maybe he was starting to get a little bit anxious, I don't know. But, I mean, certainly that 7th round, it did seem that there was a bit of a perceptible shift just in terms of the action. You could see Wilder was a little bit more aggressive, but so was Ortiz. And ultimately, maybe Ortiz got overconfident because he was well up on my card. I did note that the broadcast, they had Wilder up on their card. I think it was after about the first 3 rounds. Larry Hazard had it, 3 rounds to nil or something like that. And I was looking at my scorecard going, what? So Bang for Buck PC Gamer says, when Frez Akendo finally going to fight? Who knows? We'll have to see what the WBA does because there was, obviously court action which guaranteed him a title shot. Hasn't come. I mean, they just need to get him out of there. So UK Rob says, it's a monetary loss, but it's all about the Fury rematch. Yeah, I agree. I think Fox went into the hole for this one, obviously outbid Showtime for it. Showtime weren't prepared to, lose, have a bath over this one, paying massive purses and such. Fox really invested in the event to effectively try and get the Fury rematch. They want to cut off that pie. So Wilder Ortiz 2 was like the Han Solo movie. No one asked for it. It hasn't done 300k. They would have released those numbers within 24 hours. Well, it doesn't normally come out within 24 hours, but normally within a week or so. But there have been more recently because it generally was within sort of 6. So I'm just looking here. So Adam Fahey says, what's with the 6 dislikes? I don't know. Maybe it was, who knows? I mean, some people are weird. Might have been because I said that Main Event Boxing Talk that I didn't want him commenting in the channel because he said I should stick to rugby league and boxing wasn't my thing. Good luck to your channel, Main Event Boxing Talk. You might be listening to this, but actually I don't care. You want to come chat shit, get banged. Jason Landis says, Boxing Squared named top 5 heavyweights Wilder has beat. I'm struggling. Well, in terms of his resume, who are the top 5 wins? I mean, Ortiz, Berman Stavern, and then you can sort of make a case for any of the other ones that are on about a par between Washington, Duhaupas, etc. Team Yi says Wilder is managed badly. I agree with that. I mean, maybe not so much anymore, but earlier in his career, I don't think they promote. I think the thing that he has lacked, which they say he doesn't need, but I think he's always needed, especially as a champion, is a promoter to push his barrow instead of him having to do all the work alone. Because when he's had to do all the work to promote himself, sometimes that's had mixed results, given sometimes the things he says don't necessarily, gel with, things that people want to hear. It can be a mixed bag about what he says. So Nobby says, hello from Newfoundland, 5:15 a.m. You are keen. Thank you for joining, Nobby. UK Rob says, if Zhang stops Rudenko, that's some kind of statement. Yep, I agree, and I'll get to that. Yulo get money. Who's going to win? Win what? Joshua and Ruiz? Is that who you're talking about? And apologies, I'm probably a couple of minutes behind on the chat just in terms of the pace that it goes. Big Boys Boxing is in the house. L-Dog says Eric Molina must have disliked after seeing that Hrgovic video. Undoubtedly. I actually had someone come to the channel just the other day saying that Eric Molina was a real shot because he's in the best condition of his career and all these other things. And I thought, and I actually said, are you a family member? Because I think Eric Molina is going to take a beating in this one, and it's going to be over early. So Shane Jordan says, why are people saying Wilder is the best puncher ever, comparing him to Tyson, etc.? People are jumping on the bandwagon, and do you like the whole mask look? In terms of the mask look and the garb that he had, I thought he must have raided Liberace's wardrobe when I saw the get-up. In terms of being the best puncher ever, well, it's subjective. I mean, there's no doubting that he's got elite power. And in terms of the crop of heavyweights right now, who hits harder than him? But comparing power across generations, it's a tricky thing. So Jason Lander says, I respect Boxing Squared, but he's way off with Wilder. Well, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I don't just, hate on heavyweights for the sake of heavyweights, I'm looking at all these guys and the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I don't think he's as bad as some people make out him to be. Sure, he hasn't, his career hasn't always gone as fast as some people would like, but in terms of the opposition that he's been facing, I don't mind it since 2018. So Marcus says, hello from Norway. Hello to you too. Sam says, jog on, you knob. That was to Main Event Boxing Talk, and he's jogged on. Thank you for that, Scott. Bang for Buck PC Gamer says, Boxing Squared, what is your favourite boxing organisation? I believe it's the IBF. The WBC is trash. I don't really have any favourite organisations. I kind of think the system's broken. None of them are really, that clean. It's, having so many organisations, sanctioning bodies, world sanctioning bodies, is just crazy. So Right Hook Boxing says, thank you as always, BS. Yeah, so if you haven't subscribe to his channel, please do so. Great channel. John Daly says, what's up Boxing Squared? UK Rob says, with Rivas rumoured to sign with Matchroom, I have heard from Canada that it may be against Brazil Jan 30th in Miami. Well, certainly there's tweets that have, and other bits of news that are suggesting he's fighting in Miami on January the 30th. Against who? I'm not sure, but if it was Brazil against Rivas, I don't mind that fight, and obviously another opportunity for Rivas to sort of prove himself and get a yardstick against Brazil, who's fought a number of decent heavyweights in the division. Clearly it didn't go his way with Deontay Wilder, but if Brazil jumps straight back into a fight of that caliber with Rivas, you got to give him some credit as well. Boxing Squared has just won a 10-8 round against Main Event. Rivas KOs Brazil Wilder style. Possibly. Okay, I'll just get to my list. I think I'm slowly catching up on the chat here. Yep. Next topic, which, well, now that we've covered Ortiz and Wilder, which was a good win for Wilder, expected win, and he moves on. Obviously, the Tyson Fury rematch likely to happen February 22nd, 2020. I mean, that's going to be a good fight should that go ahead. I mean, Frank Warren's been mentioning announcements possibly soon with some details still to be worked out. I'm interested with that before I get onto my actual next topic. How are they going to sort of divvy up the broadcasting rights and who gets what? Is it simulcast or is it? Yeah, it's a kind of a minefield, and some of that stuff can sometimes take a long time to work out. And I think Bob Arum, he stated the other day that it was still, they were still trying to work on that stuff, and I just wondered, is that a bad sign? It's only 3 months away, or less than 3 months away now. So we have this week had news. Dillian Whyte is going to be added to that December 7th card. Interested in your thoughts on that, because obviously that's not sort of sat well with everyone. This UCAD situation that's going on with Whyte, no resolution in sight by the look of it, and we'll have to see where that goes. But drop some thoughts on that, and we'll talk about it. But I'll just work my way through some comments here. So Cash for Cat says, Boxing Squared Heavyweight Champion of Boxing Chat. Well, thank you for that. James Burrell says, at least he isn't limited by a $120 million offer. Is that Wilder? Yeah. I mean, the whole thing about the offers and that sort of thing, and what people make in the end. I mean, if Wilder gets knocked out in his next fight or loses to Tyson Fury, or is retired by injury or something, freak accident happens, people will always let him know that. But if he somehow manages to make more, it might end up being one of the smartest decisions in boxing history. I mean, because even if he got beaten by Tyson Fury, that sets up a trilogy which probably makes them more money than the first two fights. So they could end up making out very well if he got beaten in February, but obviously he wouldn't want that to happen. So L-Dog says, Andy Ruiz is pretty good for his dimensions, so I would say he is also elite. John says, L-Dog, Parker and Ruiz both have good skills. Adam says, Wilder has perfected his style, he only needs to set up the right hand once. Noah is watching from Japan. Welcome, Noah. Mark says, I can't wait for Hrgović to step up to the top table. Well, we'll have to see where Matchroom move him next year. It's been pretty slow for him since he joined them on that co-promotional arrangement. So Kiwi says, who thinks... Apologies for that, someone just opened the door. So Kiwi Bud says, if I can just get back to my place, who thinks Michael Hunter is going to best Povetkin? I certainly do. I'll talk about that probably next week's live stream, more about the undercard then too. I do think that this is a case where the younger, hungry fighters probably going to just get one over on the sort of aging, pro who's still very skilled but is a bit long in the tooth in Povetkin. So Mark says Hunter all the way, points victory. John says, Adam Fahey, this narrative that Wilder needs to be perfect for 2 seconds whilst his opponent has to be perfect for 36 minutes predisposes his opponent has no power. Well, Ortiz, generally regarded as a good puncher, good power. But I think one of the things that, even though Wilder can look sloppy, he is underrated, defensively, because he can manage to, ride shots and get out of the way of some, and he's not as bad on the defensive end as some people make out. Otherwise he would have been clipped and taken out. So Dwayne says, do I know what's happening with Dillian Whyte and his drug thing because he's on the AJ Ruiz undercard? Who knows what's happening with that? UCAD is certainly taking its time, and I think because there is the air of the unknown with what's happening, we don't know all the facts of the matter, kind of makes it worse. But because it was leaked, it's all exposed, that the situation exists at all, and it hasn't really been good for Whyte at all, whether he's innocent or guilty. So James Burrell says, I suspect there are several legends that could match his KO ratio against the same level of opposition. Yeah, possibly. L-Dog says, there's too many damn fanboys in boxing now. Heavyweight boxing is just split between Wilder, Fury and Joshua fanboys. This is why I like Squared. He keeps it real. Thank you for that. Jeez, I've just scrolled down and I'm way off where I was. Just a second, I'll find my place here. Adam says, Wilder, through his length and has a decent chin, in my opinion, proven his statement is correct. Well, it's the ultimate get out of jail free. It's the ultimate get out of jail card. It's proven to be at this point. So, have I given your prediction for Joshua versus Ruiz, and how you? I can't read the rest of that. Think the fight will go. It's quite, I've done a number of videos, including I did my 10 things to watch for. I mean, really, this comes down to, who makes the adjustments and who can execute those adjustments in the rematch. I mean, Joshua's been working on a skill base and other bits and pieces for, months now, even before he got into training camp. Can he actually, use his height and his reach against the smaller man who wants to come in, work the body, fast hands, let his punches go in bunches? It really is down to what can he do, because we know what Andy Ruiz will do and wants to do, and he's a good counterpuncher, so he'll work off what Joshua is willing to give him. I could totally see it being a stink fest to some extent, especially in some of the early going, as both. Ruiz will. I don't think he'll necessarily want to be overly cautious, but if Joshua is not giving him much, it could end up being quite low volume. A la the first half a dozen rounds in the the Wilder and Ortiz fight. It just could end up being quite a sort of cagey chess match early on. I mean, I think there could, if I was to just pick what was going to happen, I think it's either two results, which was, I think, Joshua on points if he can be disciplined, or Ruiz potentially by the same result. And one of the keys that I believe is going to be big for Ruiz is body punching. That really took the stuffing out of Anthony Joshua in the first fight. Putting aside round 3, later in the fight, because Joshua did rally to some extent, and I think he, had a decent 5th round or whatever it was. But in the 6th round, Ruiz really worked Joshua's body over. And that was one of those things that I sort of thought that really, finished him off. Took the sort of stuffing out of him, made it hard for him to continue. And I think Ruiz, will look to do some of the same again. But Joshua's got to make him pay when he's coming in, because in the first fight, even ahead of the 3rd round knockdown, Ruiz was just walking in. There was no resistance, and if that happens again, it's bad news for Joshua. So Noah says White needs to address his PED and glove issue himself. Well, it's almost, the glove issue is one of these things that is a really concerning look, because obviously the glove selection happened, and then on fight night there's a new pair of gloves which Rivas' team wasn't allowed to inspect, which to me seems incredible. And how the British Boxing Board of Control let that go, it really is... it's kind of amazing. And the fact that the WBC has boosted Rivas up the rankings, because he petitioned them at their recent convention, he's now up to, I think it's 5th in the rankings. That is, in itself, is that an admission or a sort of punishment of an acknowledgement that there was something that happened that shouldn't have? Because if there was no case, because they were making a case he should be number 1 based on the PED issue, but specifically the glove issue. They thought that was well off, and that wasn't within the spirit of the laws in sport and all that sort of stuff. And they want something to happen over that. And the fact he was boosted from where he was, which was lower down the rankings, he's effectively gone up, was it 5 places or whatever? That kind of implies that they agree with him, with Yvonne Michelle, his promoter, and Oscar Rivas, who was in Mexico at the convention. So James Burrell says, who do you think is next for Ortiz? Probably an in-house fight with someone in the PBC, Charles Martin, Dominic Brazil. Maybe even Adam Kovnatsky. Depending on where things go. If Kovnatsky and Ortiz got in the ring and Kovnatsky beats him, then obviously that strengthens his case again to try and get a fight with Wilder if one becomes available. But yeah, Ortiz, he's probably done in terms of getting another title shot. This is probably his last one, but it's who knows. I was thinking if he took a beating and it was a bad knockout, he may retire, but he put up a credible effort, so he'll probably continue and most likely an in-house fight. So Kiwi Bud says, I'd love to see Wilder against Parker. I think that'd be an interesting fight, but because of promotional concerns, it's just not probably going to happen. So Dilo 404 Boxing says, Marius Wok looked ready to become a full-time dog greeter last time I saw him in the ring. Yeah, I'll get to that in a moment soon, because that's another... actually, no, I'll talk about it now, because Dillian White fighting Marius Wok, yeah, it's not a great fight, is it? If this was Marius Wok from 4 or 5 years ago, it's a really competitive fight, and you'd be asking all sorts of questions, but he's looked well on the slide for about 3 years now, and against Martin Bacoli and some prior opposition, yeah, he hasn't shown much, and it feels like it's a case of cashing the paychecks to some extent now. So Charlton Player says, hello to you too. So Sam says the mental doubt will play more on Ruiz this time around than AJ, as he has now more to lose and AJ has that hunger to get back what is his. Well, I think they both, mentally, they have to, a lot of different issues, not necessarily the same issues that they have to mentally prepare themselves for. I mean, obviously with Ruiz Jr., and I covered this in my video on the channel the other day, talking about Andy Ruiz Jr. being the champion. He wants to prove it's not a one-off. He wants to, keep his titles. Is there complacency that is set in? Because if there has been, that won't be good for him, because if he overlooks Anthony Joshua, who's, been trash talking to some extent in recent months, saying he can't box, does he go in there just a little bit complacent? There's a number of things he has to do, but Joshua, that loss was pretty, it's a low sort of point in his career. What a cut to the bone. I mean, how do you recover from that? I mean, what do you do and what can you do to recover from that? And, sure, he's been trying, and I'm sure he's had a pretty good camp and all sorts of people and made adjustments, but is it enough? I mean, can he sort of go in there and, really sort of, beat his demons to reclaim those titles? I mean, there's all sorts of interesting talking points around that fight. So Marla says, talking to someone else. So UK Rob Boxing says, I think they're reconsidering the Wilder Fury rematch being in Las Vegas due to recent poor sales there. Canelo and Wilder reported low numbers. Should be the East Coast. Yeah, wasn't it 10,000 for Canelo, and I'm not exactly sure of the Wilder Fury number, but there were reports that it was struggling to sell tickets, and they were shipping a lot of lower price tickets in the final days and comp tickets and that sort of stuff. I guess it goes back to, I mean, boxing is to some extent still a fringe sport. Obviously, Las Vegas is a hub for boxing, but with some of the fights that some of the guys have been in, the fights that people really wanted to see. So for all the talk, yeah, it was a decent fight with Luis Ortiz, but people weren't clamoring for it. And I think when there is real demand, that's when ticket sales do better. But you have to put that, alongside ticket pricing too. I mean, some of the tickets for Canelo and Wilder's fight were extremely expensive, and they were probably very optimistic about how they'd go. I mean, some of them got slashed big time for both of those guys, and in the end, they still couldn't fill the seats. So UK Rob says, I'm bored of people asking for the B sample. I am a little bit too. I mean, I just want this whole thing to be over. Either way, if he's guilty or if he's not guilty or whatever they're going to say about it, it'd be good for, I think just boxing fans in general. We just want to move on. So Bacon and Egg says, I'll be glad to see White back in the ring. Adam Fahey says, okay, talking to someone else. So Big Boys Boxing says, I think White will stop Wok round 9 to 10. Wok is shot. Yeah, I think if he does get a stoppage, it's probably going to be later in the fight. I mean, Wok is still durable. I don't think he's nearly as durable as he was. He's certainly not as, he's well faded now. But, there's a possibility that it could go the distance. I mean, we'll have to see what happens. But, that in itself, it's no shame. But you'd hope for Dillian Whyte to really announce himself back to the heavyweight division, that if he could get a knockout, be the first guy to truly knock him out, drop him, badly hurt him, even, knock him out cold. That in itself is a massive statement, but how much credit could you give that, considering, he's faded beyond belief now? I mean, it's kind of like a Kevin Johnson win now. Doesn't necessarily mean as much as it used to. So John says AJ also got rid of Jason Gavin quicker than Wilder. Well, some of the triangle stuff doesn't necessarily always work. So Kiwi says, you and Boxing Squared are the best boxing news guys on YouTube. Well, thank you for that, Kiwi Buds. I think he's talking about Kiwi Box, aka Big Boys Boxing, formerly Kiwi Box, but now Big Boys Boxing. If you haven't checked out his channel, he also does heavyweight mostly, but other weight divisions as well, such as cruiserweight. Do check out his channel and subscribe. So Dilo 404 Boxing says, if he'd have signed that offer and got beat or injured shortly thereafter, he'd likely never see the 120 anyway. So I take it that's on Deontay Wilder. Okay, I'm just scrolling back up the chat because by the look of it, I'm about 150 comments behind. I may have to just skirt over a few of these. There's a lot of people chatting to each other. So Scott says White versus Walk, battle of the shots, needle shots. Ruthless Scott. So Dwayne says, has his doping scandal been swept under the rug? I don't necessarily think it has. I mean, if anything, we wouldn't have known about it if there hadn't have been a leak. So that would have just followed their normal process, which is, the right to privacy and confidentiality. We wouldn't have been none the wiser. And the fact that, Dillian Whyte and Eddie Hearn are sort of saying they want something to be resolved, now so he can move on with his career is actually quite a shortening of what would be a normal UCAD process, which can take, 12 months, 18 months, sometimes longer. Even sometimes the real straightforward ones. I think Ryan Martin recently tested positive for testosterone. That was a straightforward case. It took a year to resolve. So, if they can get anything out in, before his next fight, which is only a week away, or even in the next few months, it's cutting down whatever UCAD's normal process time is. So, Chupacabra says, how much you betting on Andy Ruiz? Deep down he's going to win. Well, I don't really bet at all. I've never been much of a gambler in terms of sports bets, that sort of stuff. So I can't say I'll be laying a bet down. I mean, I've done the odd cheeky bet here and there over the years, but not really a lot. But, I mean, you could probably, depending on the odds, you could hedge your bet with maybe an Andy Ruiz knockout or a Joshua points win. I mean, I sort of see those as the two most likeliest results. But, I mean, who knows? So Marla says, I would back Wilder against White and Chisora. He's got the height, reach, and speed advantage, and they are easy to hit. Well, maybe in the next year or two, we'll possibly see at least one of those fights. So Shane says, what do you make of AJ's interviews? I've watched them all, and his mindset seems a little off. Did you watch the Gloves Are Off roundtable with Hay, Frotch, etc.? I'll start with that last one first. What a dreadful watch. All I heard was them talking about their own careers and then talking over each other. It was hard to watch. Sure, there was some insights weaved in between, but it seemed like more of a battle of the egos. So Adam says, Adam Fahey, what about the fact Kawanaki got rid of Spilker and Washington quicker than Wilder? Povetkin completely slept Duhaupas, who ended his fight on his feet. Adam Fahey. So this is the thing, it's a slippery slope when it's all about common opponents and how fast you got rid of them, because styles make fights and, you know, performances make fights, and just because one guy beats one quicker than the other, I mean, the last opponent for a couple of these guys, there is something to be said. I'll just move on because, yeah, the whole triangle theory, I don't necessarily subscribe to it. It becomes pretty, it depends how you're trying to make your argument too, because you can make it fit whatever you're trying to fit. But I just kind of think, you know, you can only judge each one on its merits, unless one guy's just knocking every single person out in the first round. Other than that, you know, different circumstances and different fights dictate, you know, the results. So Adam says, and this is back to Chupacabra, I've got 50 on Ruiz via stoppage, another 50 on rounds 7 to 9. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of money to be made somewhere on this fight. Exactly where, I'm not sure, but yeah, Adam may have a tip there though. A lot of discussion in the chat here about betting and Wilder and other fighters here. What I might do is just get to my next topic here. It's becoming apparent I'm never going to catch up on the chat, so I'll just get to my next one. So this is the fights this weekend. I wanted to quickly touch on this, and Zhili Zhang versus Andrei Rudenko. This is this matchroom card in Monaco, and Hughie Fury versus Pavel Sauer. It's for Zhili Zhang, it really is crunch time. I just put up a video before. If you haven't watched it, you can. My thoughts on the two fights more in depth. They are there. It's go time for the 36-year-old Chinese heavyweight, because he's, you know, rotting on the vine at the moment. 14 months inactive. If he's going to make a move, he's got to make a move in the heavyweight division now. And Rudenko is a good stepping stone to get to the next place he needs to be. But, you know, Rudenko is the best opponent he would have ever faced. So it's not a gimme. And if he can go in there and he looks good, he outboxes him and gets a decision, and it's a good decision win, then that sort of sets him up for a good fight. But, you know, sometimes the gate is closed. I mean, we don't know what he's got left at 36 years old. It's a padded record. I mean, Rudenko is not the greatest fighter in the world, but he's at a certain level, and Zhang has never fought at that level in the heavyweight division. And I saw a clip by Matchroom, actually, that they put out with Zhili Zhang talking about beating Andy Ruiz Jr. in the amateurs in 2008, and Joshua like several years ago as well in the amateurs. And I was thinking to myself, it doesn't have any bearing on your professional career at the moment. You know, trying to relive the glory days of, you know, amateur boxing, and just sort of, you know, that's the way that they're trying to position him as a heavyweight. It's a pointless endeavor. He's got to go in there and just get the job done. And I am picking him to win by points. But it may not be easy. But I do think that, you know, he is a talented boxer. He's a good body puncher. And we saw that Rudenko was hurt to the body by Ajit Kabial in their fight earlier this year. And at 36 as well, Rudenko is looking, you know, sort of a bit of a shadow of himself. So, and at short notice, I mean, what version of Rudenko turns up? Because he's the late notice opponent after Sergey Kuzmin got injured. But yeah, it's an event that Zhang needs to look good at, because his whole career is effectively riding on it to some extent. The other fight, Hughie Fury versus Pavel Sauer, it's not the greatest fight in the world. I mean, I believe Pavel Sauer is a high-level journeyman. He sort of proved as much in the Jermaine Franklin fight. Franklin just didn't seem to be able to string his punches together, you know, in terms of the volume to get him out of there. He hurt him a number of times, but just wasn't able to put the foot down and just follow up, you know, and rip combinations. I think that Hughie Fury, he may be able to put some combinations together. If he hurts Sauer, you know, with one of those arcing right hands, maybe he could hurt him to the point that he's able to, you know, get an accumulation stoppage, you know, beat him up and take him out. And that would be a good look for him, because obviously in the context of Pavel Sauer's career in terms of the losses. You've got Franklin on one end, which was a 10-round decision loss, down on the canvas in that fight. And the other end of the scale, you've got Filip Hrgovic, who just demolished him in a round. If you're Hughie Fury, you want to try, if you can, look impressive and take him out, somewhere in the, maybe mid-rounds or something at the latest if you could. But if it is a decision and he looks good and he looks better than Jermaine Franklin, well, I think some people will be looking at it going, okay, well, it's not world level, he's got a good win, on to the next one. And I'm not trying to necessarily put everything on the common opponents, but sometimes you can look for things, and if Hughie Fury is able to set up his punches well and can get a knockout against a guy that just went 10 rounds with Jermaine Franklin, who's arguably a top 30 guy, I think it's a good look for Fury. So Big Boys Boxing says, I got Ruiz getting to Joshua again and winning by TKO. What I might do, because I'm so far behind on the chat, I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. So if you want to drop any comments here on the Zhilei Zhang and Andrei Rudenko fight, and also Hughie Fury versus Pavel Sauer, drop it now and we can talk about it. So Jovan says, Boxing Squared, always interesting listening. Thank you for the comment. Thank you for joining the live stream. We got 69 in the chat. Please smash that like button. Apparently there's a bunch of dislikes in there. I don't know, it might have been from that clown main event boxing talk or whatever his name is. He's gone from the chat now. So Adam Fahey says Cash Ali is out tonight in a cheeky 6-rounder. And actually I might just talk about the rest of the schedule for the weekend, because it's really light. Cash Ali is out in Sheffield. That's not much of a fight for him. It's not really one that we probably canvass in any real depth. You also have Robert Helenius in some random fight in Estonia of all places, so he returns. Remember, he was sparked out by Gerald Washington a number of months ago, and from there Gerald Washington, his stock has risen, and he's been one of Andy Ruiz Jr.'s main sparring partners, currently with Ruiz Jr. in Saudi Arabia. And that might just sort of parlay into the next sort of topic after this, after we get through this. Also on the schedule, you've got Jared Anderson and Guido Vianello. They're on the Frampton card, which is in Las Vegas. So James Burrell says, I see 6 dislikes. If everyone likes you, then you can't be trusted. L-Dog says, Lomachenko is barely known in the US, does around 2.8 million. Prelims doing only 141k is not that good. I would have expected 300k or so for a prelim. I mean, we can make, just by those figures and other figures, an educated guess, but maybe there was the will for people to buy the fight. If not, it'll just prove that it was probably a fight that they shouldn't have run back, especially for financial reasons. Because if it only does 200k, 250k, then it probably ends up being someone's taken a bath over that. Just getting back to the chat, Zhilei Zhang. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says, I got Zhang beating Rudenko by decision. I don't rate Zhang's power. Yeah, I'm a little bit the same. He's a decent puncher, but he's not necessarily a huge puncher. I think if he strings his punches together, he's got the power to hurt Rudenko, but maybe not take him out. I mean, that was part of the problem in Ajit Kabayel's fight against Rudenko. He had him hurt a couple of times, especially when he ripped him to the body and dropped him, but just couldn't finish the job when it looked like he was going to get it done midway through that fight. So I could totally see that being a decision win for Zhilei Zhang. And as I said in my video, the preview video that I dropped earlier today, maybe something like 7 rounds to 3. I could see Rudenko having a little bit of success. And actually, if anything, Zhang, who's fought at a pretty low level, if there is a few challenges and adversity, that's not the worst thing for him. So John Otter says, does Zhang stop Rudenko in your opinion, Boxing Squared? I don't think so. His last couple of fights at any real level, where he's gone rounds like Alexander Povetkin, it's ended up being decision losses, etc. So I think that it'll be a decision loss, another one for Rudenko. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk, and so I'll just get back to I can't skip over this one. So the Quags, thank you. Hopefully I've pronounced that right. Thank you for the super chat there. He says free YouTube money, great channel. I'm subbed. Thank you very much for the super chat and for joining the conversation in this weekly Boxing Squared live stream. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says Estonia isn't that weird for Hellenius. It borders Finland and it's got a language similar to Finnish. Well, just in terms of rolling out in your return fight in Estonia, it did seem coming out of left field and at short notice. So L-Dog says 6 dislikes from fanboys. Wilder and Joshua fanboys are the worst. Adam Fahey says Jared and Guido both with Team Barry. Is Jared Anderson is he being trained by Kevin Barry? I wasn't aware of that. I knew Guido was. Adam says, what about the fanboys? They're pretty bad. L-Dog says he has fangirls, not fanboys. We'll take your word for it there. Teddy B, Midwest Sports Talk. Sorry, it's like 10:30 at night here, starting to get a little bit on the tired side, so I'll just have a quick drink. So he says, I like Guido, he has a long way to go, but I like him. Jared Anderson looks advanced, honestly. Yeah, I mean, as prospects, they're looking pretty decent at the moment. There's a lot of raw potential there. And Vianello, he boxed at a decent level as an amateur. I don't know as much about Jared Anderson, but that fight against Daniel Infante, which is his debut a couple of weeks ago or whatever it was, a couple of months ago, maybe it was weeks ago, that was a good first run out, and there's a lot of raw potential there. Okay, people are accusing each other of being fanboys and fangirls here. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News has fought in Estonia 3 times during his career, and quite recently also. I'm not disputing anything like that, but at a few days' notice with a fight being put on in Estonia, it did come from as a bolt from the blue. Sam says Usyk vs Parker would be a good fight. Well, that was one that his previous promoter, David Higgins, who manages him, didn't seem that keen on at the end of last year, even though Parker publicly has sort of said, I'm quite keen for that fight. But it does look like it will ultimately go to Derek Chisora potentially. It does seem like things are lining up for that fight. And if that's the case, then Joseph Parker is the odd man sort of in that sort of equation with those 3 fighters. It'll be interesting to see who they can match him with, because I don't want to necessarily see Parker in just some sort of, tune-up with another Alex Leopai type character. It's time for him to have, if it's not going to be at that Chisora level, at least try to get someone within the top 50. Previously in the past, when we've heard Parker's going to have a fight against that'll be effectively a tune-up or something like that, you knew it was going to be like the Alexander Flores fight, for example. It was going to be someone who was outside the world 150. He needs a good fight. He needs a good opponent, or a relevant opponent to some extent. Get a little bit more sort of buzz to his name, because at the moment, after one fight in 2019, it seems to be treading water, not necessarily with fans, but just in general with his career. And I know he's not happy, but I guess it's pulling out of that Chisora fight because of the spider bite, which no one's fault, but it's kind of cost him. So UK Rob says that he's binary neutral as a fan. We'll take your word for that, Rob. Sam says, what's your thoughts on Tony Yoka? He's really sliding under the radar. I do like Tony Yoka as a prospect. He's one of my top 6 prospects that I've got my eye on. He's going to be facing, I believe, Christian Hammer next month. And that's at under 10 fights facing a Christian Hammer who earlier this year fought Luis Ortiz and gave him a good fight. It's a good name. He's fought Dimitrenko and Walsh this year after coming back from that 1-year ban for missing drug tests. Tony Yoka is actually sort of stacking up a nice little resume for a prospect. So Teddy B Midwest Sports Talk says, I think that's a bad matchup for Usyk. Parker being a smaller, quicker heavy that still has heavy power. See, with that fight, I kind of see this as, because both those guys, good boxers, good movement. But can Joseph Parker sustain, because there's always been a bit of a question mark about stamina, and Usyk makes you work. And you saw Tony Bellew have a lot of success early in that fight, but he just got worn down. Usyk was making him work, making him think, not giving him, time and, time off in rounds. And often Joseph Parker sort of has this almost like, through the mid-rounds, it's like a sort of energy-conserving mode. And it's like he's, trying to save energy for the later rounds, but that can cost him rounds as well. So Teddy B Midwest Sports Talk says Parker has had enough tune-ups. I agree. Boxing Squared, who is your favourite prospect? Well, I've got 6 of them, and some of them are pretty obvious ones as well. Obviously, like Daniel Dubois. There's F.A. Jagba, Aslanbek Makhmadov, Tony Yoka, Joe Joyce, and there's someone else. And Joyce may not really be a prospect anymore. It's one other that I'm forgetting that I'll probably remember in a second. L-Dog says, I've started thinking that Usyk stops AJ late. Anything could happen. I think there's a lot of people that want to write off Usyk straight away, but he had an amateur career where he fought a lot of big guys, and he was actually handling his business pretty well. James Burrell says, I agree, Parker has had the tune-ups. He needs to step back up. And that back up, that's the interesting question now. Who is he going to get lined up with if a Chisora fight is off the table? Because that seemed like the appropriate sort of step that you'd want to get back to world level. But he may have to have maybe 2 fights to really get back into the sort of fight he would want. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says, so to me it makes perfect sense about Estonia. I'll take your word for it. Just on a few days' notice, Helenius being thrown in Estonia against the journeyman. Yeah, it sort of was a bit of a bolt from the blue, as I say. So thoughts on Lucas Brown versus Bowie Tupou? At this point, both of those guys, Lucas Brown is far from what he used to be. Bowie Tupou is, an outright journeyman at this point. It's effectively a club fight of sorts. I know Lucas Brown is trying to talk his way into a bigger fight. He needs to get an impressive win to really sort of keep himself at any sort of level. They're talking about a Dempsey-McKean fight. McKean has signed his end of the deal with Brown, but Brown is still talking about maybe a David Price fight next year. So L-Dog says, Usyk beats Parker similar to how he beats Gassiev. Potentially. Right Hook Boxing says, crazy that Huey has had better opposition this year than Parker in the end. Well, he's had more fights than, that Povetkin and Fury fight was still so random to me, how that ever got made. It just, out of the blue. Easy Peel says, I see Nick Webb is making a comeback. I thought he had retired. No, I think he had a fight. Didn't he have a fight a few weeks back? I think he's already had a tune-up fight just recently. James Burrell says Parker is a good fight for a lot of people. Parker versus Rivas would be a good one. That would be a good one. I think there's a lot of matchups they could make in the Matchroom stable, and they've got a big stable of heavyweights now. They need to start pitting some of these guys together, because they can't just keep bringing in opponents. They need to actually have some of these better heavyweights and even some of the better prospects. Martin Piccoli versus a number of these guys, that's a good fight, and Piccoli seems open to anything at this point. Ajit Kabiel has a fight penciled in. Hopefully it's to come. He's another guy who's had a pretty quiet year as well. He's just joined ESPN and Top Rank on a co-promotional deal with SES, penciled in for early 2020. Hopefully it's a somewhat decent name, and if it was Carlos Takam, I'd be fine with that. Dubois versus Yoka, let's go, champ. Oh yeah, the other prospect that was in my top 6 was, I can't forget that, Filip Hrgović. So John says Usyk is the same height as Parker and has a reach advantage. How many southpaws has Parker faced? Probably, yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, there was Jason Bergman and Samoa, but that was a number of years ago. He hasn't really faced many southpaws at all. L-Dog says Usyk is underrated. I really don't get this idea that he gets smashed. Yeah, and I agree with you. I sort of think that because he was at cruiserweight, it's one of these things people are quick to write him off. And to some extent, I think that's also happened with, to begin with Michael Hunter when he came to cruiserweight. No one was talking about him. It took that Bacoli fight, then he takes out a couple of other guys like Ustinov, and there was Maldonado, and now he's beaten Sergey Kuzmin, who was, pretty heavy-handed. He comfortably beat Kuzmin, made him look a bit average, and all of a sudden everyone's talking about Michael Hunter, a guy that Usyk beat. So UK Rob says, does anyone think Okolie can stop Glavatsky? I guess the question is, does anyone think that Okolie can get through about 30 seconds of a fight with not clinching? That probably is the more pertinent question. Are there any news on a potential Usyk vs Chisora fight? Just which was what's been in the news in recent days, saying that they're still talking about it. But it seems like that's closer to being made than Parker Chisora. But who knows? Maybe it's negotiating tactics to try and get Chisora a bigger payday against Joseph Parker. Because if they can nail, sort of drive down Parker's paycheck and drive up Chisora's paycheck, at the end of the day, these guys are prize fighters. And if they can make more money on one fight over another, sometimes it's a simple equation. So L-Dog says, Usyk's straight lefts to the body are lethal. He would wear AJ down and eventually overwhelm him. That's my opinion. I don't think AJ would be able to keep up with Usyk, and the fatigue would kill him. I guess that's if everything went right for Usyk. I guess we saw in that fight with Bellew, he wasn't unhittable, and Bellew did manage to clip him with a couple of shots. A bigger puncher, maybe that would give Usyk some trouble. That could alter some of the way that he fights. If you get tagged with something and you don't like it, you don't want to go in for a second dose. So Adam says, which was put, and this is Parker Bergman, I think, which was a fight put together as they were in line to fight Martin for the IBF before AJ came with the ships of money. Right Hook Boxing says, you have to assume they want Huey to get a stoppage on his comeback. Never confident of a Huey stoppage, though. Yeah, I'm sort of, leaning towards a stoppage later on if it happens. Sour on the performance against Franklin. You're going to have to work for the stoppage to some extent. I mean, Franklin and Huey Fury aren't guys with big pop. I definitely think Filip Hrgović is a much bigger puncher than those two, and hence why he was able to get Sour out of there. And he probably, set up a pretty brutal, compared to these other guys, he's got better setup punches for knockouts. But in terms of, them wanting a stoppage, well, I'm sure they would take it if it came along. But yeah, it could go to points, but I think it's better look for Fury if he does take him out. Although, that's not a lock. So James says, I think Okolie loses to Glavatsky. Wayne says Price versus Huey Fury. I think Price would be interested in that. That's not a bad fight, actually. Yeah, that's quite interesting. No one really talks about a sort of fight like that. But I guess with Huey Fury, if they beat Pavel Sauer, you probably have Peter Fury talking about, they're sort of past the David Price level and they're, searching for a world level fight. I mean, Peter Fury in an interview had talked about for 2020 that they're looking at a heavyweight world title shot for Huey Fury, and I thought, just nowhere near it. Not going to get it, one, because of the way that the sort of champions, what they've got lined up. That's in the way. There's mandatories for Ruiz and the winner of Ruiz and Joshua. But no one's going to voluntarily just give Huey Fury a shot. It's not happening. I just sort of thought, it's just dreaming. Scott says Huey needs a good stoppage. I completely agree. If he could get one, that helps his cause. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he's ready for world level again. That's been part of the problem. This yo-yo up and down from these, say Samuel Peter, then on to Alexander Povetkin. I mean, stuff like that. You're just like, really? Or Sam Sexton, then straight up to Kubrat Pulev. There's gulfs and levels, and he hasn't necessarily been fighting consistently in the way that he's been fighting. And what I mean by that, if you think of those 3 fights, the losses, Parker, Pulev, and Povetkin, fought completely different in all of them. And not necessarily, that flattering either. I just lost my place there. Just a second, bear with me. I'll just have a sip of water here too. So we're 1 hour 10 into the chat, maybe go for another 20 minutes or so, and I say that probably blows out to about 2 hours. We're about two-thirds of the way through my list of topics, and the chat's moving pretty quickly. I've already fallen behind again, so apologies if I missed your comments earlier. I had to skip past about 100 comments. I was never going to catch up. So Adam Fahey says, ruthlessly, Boxing Squared, Brown versus Tupou is the fight of the bouncers. I guess it is, yeah. John says, Adam Fahey, I like Usyk Park. That's still the fight if the WBA goes vacant. Oh, Parker. Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, I mean, whichever belt, whoever drops, if one does drop it, opens up the possibility of a Pulev versus Kovnatsky in the IBF sense, or at the moment, the way the rankings for the WBO would be Usyk versus Parker. Presuming that is that Fury, who's at number 2 at the moment, does fight Deontay Wilder, and if Joshua loses, then obviously, he's dropping out as well, and he wouldn't be getting a shot automatically as well. So Baz says, be good to see Parker versus the winner of Povetkin Hunter. Yeah, I like that fight. If they could make Parker versus Hunter or Parker versus Povetkin, happy with either of that. Even him fighting the loser, I wouldn't mind. So Teddy B at Midwest Sports Talk says, so Brown is ducking David Price doppelganger for David Price. If he can get that fight, he's been calling him out in the last week or so, wanting the David Price fight, and some of that will just be down to opportunities and money. Dempsey McKean has signed his end of the deal. That's up on his Instagram. Brown's been sent the contract, and I think he's agreed to the terms at least, and send the contract over. But from the sounds of it, he hasn't necessarily signed it. So I think he'll see what happens with this Tupou fight, which is next month, and assess his options and any offers that are coming his way. I mean, at the end of the day, he's a prize fighter. He's made no bones about he wants to make as much money as possible, because he says he hasn't made a lot of money and he wants to sort of get as much while he can. And a price fight just might offer a lot more than Dempsey McKean. And let's face it, Dempsey McKean probably sees Brown as a stepping stone at this point. So L-Dog says, I want Huey versus Hrgovic. Would go well on the Usyk versus Chisora undercard, both top 25 WBC and young matchroom fighters. That could be an interesting fight too, and if Huey beats Pavel Sauer, there's options for them. But like I say, they've got to start matching some of these matchroom guys together. Can't keep bringing in opponents. We're 2020, we need to see some real fights. I mean, like I was covering the schedule earlier, you've got the Monaco card where you've got Zhili Zhang, who's been inactive for 14 months, versus Andrei Rudenko. Then you've got Huey Fury versus Pavel Sauer. There's almost nothing else on this weekend. There's a few prospects in action, but not much of note. And it seems to be almost every weekend we're sort of saying, we've got 1 or 2 fights, but then there's all these other guys who are inactive for several months at a time. So Adam Fahey says Ruiz won't drop the WBA as Mando isn't for another 4 months. Yeah, he won't be dropping that. It's the one that's, then it has to effectively be next is Kubrat Pulev, because the IBF has already made the ruling that he gets a shot before the end of May. So if they wanted to drop that because they don't want to, fall into the timing or whatever, they could. And then obviously fight the WBO mandatory, which would be Alexander Usyk. But, who knows? Maybe they can work out a deal and have the mandatories back-to-back in terms of IBF and then WBO. I mean, the sanctioning bodies, especially if whoever's waiting for their title shot has paid some step-aside money or whatever, I don't know, they can always come to different agreements. So Ness says, what's good Boxing Squared and chat? Hello to you too, Ness. So the Quag says, I thought the champ doesn't have any Mandos. What you mean for the Ruiz Joshua winner? Oh, they've got them lined up. The WBO is due. The IBF is due. The fact that we haven't had, any mandatories this year, they're just piling up. There's going to be very little leeway, especially the IBF has already said Pulev needs to have a shot by the end of May. I mean, I know people keep saying unification trumps mandatory, but when you've got organisations like the IBF who are stricter and have already come well ahead of any fights and said this guy needs to have his title shot, they're not going to muck around. Oh, in terms of the WBA Quags, yeah, there's no mandatory challenger for them yet, but there will be probably another 6 months or so. So Usyk Parker would be a great fight. I've been saying this on here since he went heavyweight. Yeah, Usyk's going to be could be in a lot of good fights with a lot of good heavyweights. I mean, when you think about it, there's of the elite heavyweights, there's like Wilder, Fury, Joshua, who was 6'6" and above. Apart from that, a lot of the heavyweight division sort of fits into that 6'3", 6'4" mold. So even though there's perception he's too small for heavyweight, he's going to be in a lot of fights where it doesn't necessarily look like he's too small for heavyweight, and in some good fights. So Sam says FA Jagba is also a prospect to look out for. Definitely, he's one of my top 6 prospects that I've been watching out for. John says Holyfield was written off when he moved up to heavyweight. Yeah, I had someone saying to me just on the channel that, like Holyfield, Usyk should have a number of fights under his belt. And I think the difference between the two is that, Usyk could claim the super champion status mandatory for the WBO at any point. And he did so. He didn't need to have all the sort of build-up fights to work into a position. He just obviously was able to call his shot. So in the meantime, he can take some fights. But effectively, he's in his prime at the moment. If he was to take half a dozen fights, it probably wouldn't go down well with what his team has planned. I could see the benefit of having a bigger run until a fight, but I just think he backs himself and he thinks he can win a belt now against whoever. Whether that's true or not, it's another story. So some talk about the WBO Super Champion status here. Yeah, they'll call that at some point. What I might do is I'll just get to my list again. Oh, I have a good question from Patreon. I'll just refresh this here just a second. Bear with me. So as I was saying earlier, thank you one and all for joining the stream. Appreciate it wherever you are, morning, noon or night, wherever in the world. Thank you for joining the stream. Thank you for supporting the channel. Channel has been going through some growth recently, which I appreciate. If you've been here for 1 day or for 2.5 years, channel's almost 2.5 years old now. Thank you one and all. So L-Dog says, will the heavyweight division die once again if Deontay Wilder is dethroned and Andy Ruiz Jr. loses to Anthony Joshua? There seems to be a real lack of American heavyweight prospects, and I'm unsure if the American audience will be interested in heavyweight boxing without a North American champion. It's a good question because, I'm of the belief, and I did a video very early on in the channel, that when boxing is strong in America, and especially with strong heavyweights, helping, because heavyweight is obviously a glamour division, it helps boxing. It's a good sort of springboard for others as well. And there has been a bit of a dearth in talent coming through, and with other professional sports sort of picking off a lot of potential boxers as they come up. There's just so many other options to choose from. They can NFL, basketball, baseball, there's so many other choices where they can make a good career and life for themselves, and boxing sometimes seems to be and I think we've seen it with a lot of different fighters, especially from MMA. They end up having or kickboxing injuries that they just become boxers. So sometimes people fall into the sport rather than necessarily coming through kids. I mean, it sort of seems to be I don't know that there's less of that now, but with it sort of becoming a fringe sport, a niche sport, and some parents won't want to put their kids into a sport that's perceived to be dangerous, that could give them brain damage. It's, I can understand the reasons why, and with that, some of the participation rates have dropped off a cliff in the past 20 years. But what's the solution? And I think obviously having an American champion getting impressive knockouts, which we've say that one over Luis Ortiz, some kid would have seen that and it would have spurred them on to take up boxing or some sort of combat sport. But I can see your point about the whole, if the belt goes. I mean, and that's been one of the arguments that's been wheeled out, that the WBC and Wilder's sort of handlers have been trying to actively manage. This is a long held one, that they've been trying to actively manage the matchmaking to try and keep the WBC belt within North America. I mean, maybe there is a little bit of merit in that, but I mean, I don't know. But I do think that even if Wilder loses or Ruiz loses, there's always going to be interest in the heavyweight division. But yeah, there seems to be no real standout prospect from America coming through at the moment. I mean, maybe it's a year or two away before we get excited about someone, but there is I mean, if you think about the top guys at the moment, are we talking about Jermaine Franklin, Cassius Chaney, Damani Rock, some of those guys that are coming through? There's no one that you just kind of go, wow. There's some good fighters, but are they going to necessarily have the drive and the wherewithal to become elite and be that guy to take the mantle? Sort of hard to really pinpoint one guy that you can sort of pin your hopes on and go, that guy's going to become a champion. What do you guys think of that? It's certainly an interesting question, because I think one of the powerhouses in boxing is the United States, and I think when heavyweight boxing is strong in the United States, it's good for the sport more broadly. So leave your thoughts on that. I mean, there's no one guy that I can see coming that I just go, yep, that's a lock for a champion. Doesn't mean there won't be, though. So Adam says, only belts I can see Ruiz possibly dropping is the WBO. The IBF Mando versus Pulev could be on Wilder Fury. In my opinion, it happens in April. Well, I guess it's interesting with Wilder and Fury. It would be less than 3 months away, February the 22nd, 2020. Is that date going to be held? I always thought it was an extremely tight turnaround, but they seem very wedded to that date. So Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News says, if Huey doesn't stop Sauer, I'll be furious. I believe Huey punches harder than Franklin, but he just doesn't do it. Hopefully he's in a good mindset, because I think if there's any opponent, I think Franklin made a bit of a hash against Sauer. This opponent for Fury should be tailor-made for him to pick him apart, and he doesn't need to do the whole sort of just shading rounds and just doing enough. Hopefully we see an aggressive Fury, but we've seen it before, like the Sam Sexton fight, and at a certain level I think he can really, look devastating. But when it comes back up to world level, that's when I'm not so confident in what Fury's going to do, because in the different losses he's had, he sort of, can't make his mind up about how he's going to fight, and he doesn't throw enough punches. So Jason says Price needs to retire. Well, I can't say I was that impressed with that performance against Derek Chisora, and that was certainly one where the towel got thrown, and I thought that's a little bit early. But it was only going to go one way in the end. But yeah, you can make a case for that. But I think if they could get a Lucas Brown fight and David Price, I think Price probably wins that. Where are we now? Makhmedov versus Price. Well, probably Price will be knocked out for a week. And L-Dog says he's a sadistic man for suggesting that. Yes, you are. So Adam says, I would not at all be surprised if Matchroom don't try to get Hunter into the position to challenge for the WBA Super. This Hunter versus Povetkin is a WBA eliminator. Yeah, so not a final eliminator, but he's certainly going to be in pole position for a shot at one of the belts in the WBA. There is 4 of them. Remembering Joe Joyce has the gold title. There's the interim title with Trevor Bryan. There's the regular title with Manuel Cha. Who knows when he will fight. 2 full years since he fought. And then obviously the super champion as well. So John says the belt holders are going to be tied up in 2020. Huey Fury needs to up his opposition incrementally rather than even thinking about world titles next year. Completely agree. Where to after Sauer if and when he beats him? Well, I wouldn't mind seeing an in-house fight for him. There's plenty of guys they could match him with. If they truly believe that he's title bound, then they should be, throwing him in there with someone like a Martin Bacoli or a Filip Hrgovic or someone on that level where there's, something on the line for both guys. So Teddy B says, seen Makhmedov at the Bertabiev fight. He's one of the biggest I've ever seen. He's legit 6'7", 260. He is a unit. He's not 6'7", I think he's 6'6", but he is a unit. James Burrell says, who do you want to see the White Rhino fighting against next? Maybe no one. I'm not so convinced he should be coming back. I mean, over to him what he ultimately does. But he kind of says one thing and then changes his mind about, he's not doing well, mentally or physically or both. And then the next week he's like, nah, I'm good. So Unrivaled says, thanks for the stream as always, Mr. Squared. Catch you next week. Thank you for joining Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News. And if you haven't joined or checked out his channel, please do so. Adam Fahey says Povetkin number 5 and Hunter number 6 in the WBA. Who knows how that will influence the rankings? Because the rankings, I don't want to get into it. It's just a mess. Some of them are just outrageous. The WBA and the WBO, some of their rankings right now, dreadful. So L-Dog says, of Makhmedov, he's a scary man, would not like to see him in Dark Alley. I completely agree with that. Liberalism is a cult. We need to wait till 2021 for a realistic title shot for Dubois. He's young, so there's no reason to rush things, but I think might be good enough now to win. That could be the case where he's good enough to win, but he's seemingly on a little bit of an island with Frank Warren. You have all these other promotional stables growing and, picking up, it's like an arms race. They're getting all the good talent. It's thinning out the guys that he could potentially face. He's going to eventually, I think his path is he's going to eventually work his way as the WBO mandatory. I think that seems to be an obvious path. The WBC has been talking very kindly of Dubois, and I think they're thinking of him as the next big thing. And I agree, 2021 or even 2022, that's sort of from that 2021 onwards, that's when Dubois is really going to start coming into his own. I just hope in the next year he can actually get some of the fights that we know he needs, because some of, Ebenezer Tete, Richard Lartey, Kyotaru Fujimoto, they're not going to do much for him. So John says Lucas Brown to come back and win a world title in 2020. Can someone put John on timeout for 5 minutes for that comment? That's disgraceful. So the Quag says, I kind of like Hunter. That dude will fight anyone. Yes and no. There was certainly some talk of Carlos Takam and Michael Hunter at the end of last year. And Hunter and his team said, actually, we want to take a breath. We want to properly prepare for this fight. We've taken short notice fights. We don't want to just jump in. We've got to take his career seriously and map it out. So it's a bit of yes and a bit of no, but it would have been taking a couple of short notice fights like Ustinov and then Takam at short notice, within 2 months. It would have been quite a bit for any heavyweight. So Adam says only ones ahead is Brian interim, Usyk, Joshua, Kovnatsky for the WBA. So Ness says, what if Ruiz wins again? What will be the status on pound for pound boxing squared? Well, I don't think any of the heavyweights will be in the pound for pound list. It's just kind of not the done thing. But in terms of if he beats Joshua again, it's a big win. And in terms of his career and his status as a top heavyweight in the division. It's confirmed that he's elite, and within, I think, boxing history, there will, Ruiz, if he can get another big win against Anthony Joshua, it does a lot for his legacy. So Liam says Price called out Brown. Brown then responded. Yeah, I could totally see why Brown would respond, because if the money's there and it's better than the Dempsey-McKean fight, he would take it. He loves fighting in the UK as well. The Quag says Price should hang them up. Someone in his family needs to step in and tell him this ain't working. Well, I mean, I think Price is much in the same situation as Lucas Brown. Fighting and scrapping for some paydays, while he's still got an opportunity to earn some. In the last year or two, Price probably earned as much money in his career, as he'd ever earned in his career in terms of, the paydays that he was getting. And he had a little minor resurgence, but in the context of it, he still hasn't proven that he can fight at a level where he's going to be, the whole talk of him could, fight for a world title, it was always premature, but it was hype to build fights. So Noah says, off topic, can we just stop with the lineal champ chat? There isn't one at the moment. No, furious not. That's probably going to set a few people off there, Noah. L-Dog says, nah, Price versus Deontay Wilder. Let's make it happen. That might be the body on the record if it does happen. UK Rob says, I was surprised Chisora was only at 14 in the WBO after winning the strap. So was I. The Intercontinental title, which is a big minor title within the WBO ranks. And it only got him to 14. I was expecting he'd be well inside the top 10. But, I mean, if you wanted to be a conspiracy theorist, maybe the WBO didn't want to be put in a position to order a Usyk and Chisora fight if a belt became vacant. And when you look at the optics of it, in terms of should that be a world title fight, you can make a case and say no. And I know that might sort of people might get up in their feelings about that, but I think that's a good fight, but maybe not necessarily a title fight. So Jason says Pulev is easy work for Ruiz. Based on his last fight against Rydell Booker, I'd certainly be picking Ruiz to win. So L-Dog says Wilder vs Price, glass will be smashed. Adam says I really see Ruiz, if he wins, versus Pulev being on the Wilder Fury card, as I don't see it being February 22nd, more like late March or early April. Well, if that did happen and it was Ruiz, because when you line it up and you've got a WBC champion, the other champion, versus two top-ranked fighters, they could make it work. I guess it, if the money works and other bits and pieces, lots of ifs, buts, and maybes. It's kind of obviously they're preparing for every contingency, a la the Pulev versus Kovnatsky fight, should that, end up coming to pass because of, a belt being vacated, etc. So John says, I can see that Pulev Ruiz on the Wilder Fury card, as Bob has said it will be a joint pay-per-view and need the numbers. Would fatten out a card, I think, to make it a lot more entitled. You have all the heavyweight titles on one card, one night. You can really market that. If Usyk is anything like Loma, and he is, he can turn smaller size into an advantage. Yeah, I don't necessarily think because he's got a smaller frame that's a huge disadvantage. We've just seen a smaller heavyweight in Andy Ruiz, who's 6'1", fast hands, good skills. He just beat the unified champion a few months ago, lest we forget. So Scott with the super chat, thank you there, Scott. He asked the question, Wilder vs Usyk, who you got? Oh man, that is a tough one, because if Wilder catches up with Usyk, it could be good night. But kind of like Tyson Fury, I could see Usyk probably winning rounds quite conclusively against Deontay Wilder and embarrassing him on the boxing front. Like, very embarrassing him on the boxing front. But as we've seen, it doesn't matter. If I had to necessarily just pick, I might edge it to Wilder just because, who can bet against that right hand at the moment? But that's tough. That's very tough. If Wilder didn't land anything of note, or Usyk was able to ride punches, get out of the way, it would be like almost a shutout, I'm sure, on the cards. 12 zip. Well, fans may have it close to that, but the judges probably end up having it like 7-5. A lot of support for Usyk winning there. Usyk KO round 7. Confidence indeed. It's an interesting matchup, and I know Deontay Wilder has sort of spat a little bit of fire Usyk's way for even mentioning his name, but I mean, these are the sort of fights that we should be hoping get made, rather than, no offense to Luis Ortiz, but it was a recycled fight no one was calling for. So, yeah, I mean, here's hoping the next 2 years we see some big fights, because let's face it, 2019, and we've kind of been made to wait. And although there was, an upset with Ruiz and Joshua, that wasn't the fight that was originally meant to be made. It ultimately, he was, when he sort of stepped back, it was meant to be Joshua fighting at Wembley in April. And everyone turned him down, including Dillian Whyte, who's now on his undercard, which is kind of a sense of irony because, let's not hash over that. But Sam says a Jagba versus Dubois, clash of the hard punches. That could be a good fight down the line. I mean, probably doesn't happen for a couple of years. Probably a belt has to be on the line, but I like it. I'd probably edge Dubois at the moment. I mean, they're both developing, so I, really need to see how they shape up. But yeah, they can both punch. So James says, I really think Wilder would want to quit against Usyk. I don't think he would want to, but I think he would want to. So L-Dog says, I think Wilder would KO Usyk. I think Joshua is the easiest to beat for Usyk. I think Usyk said that he thought Wilder would be the easiest of the three. So Sam says, with the footwork of Usyk, I don't think Wilder could land one punch on him. Well, that's what they said about Fury, and he did manage to land a couple. So, yeah, it's tough to sort of just, write someone off. And I think Wilder's been written off throughout his whole career, but if anything, he's got the power to get back in any fight. If he can land the punch, of course. So John says Wilder would fight Usyk on a PBC card. Only look at the scorecards for the Ortiz fight. Wilder would just implement the same game plan, and if he didn't put Usyk away, the judges would save Wilder's. Oh, I would hate to see something like that happen, because we've got too much shiftiness in boxing as it is, and if there was a runaway decision to the challenger, it was clear that he'd beaten the champion, taken his title. Something like that would be, a robbery would be almost, at this point with everything that's been going on and the sort of the fervor that's with fans over these perceived judging and scorecard, robberies and, people just, on the wrong side of things, it could really hurt a legacy, and fans would sour very quickly. So James says Usyk throws about 80 punches per round and never lets up. Wilder would get lost in all of what Usyk does. Well, he would just be constant, a whir of motion. He would be looking to just turn Deontay Wilder and just not let him set those feet. But even if Wilder doesn't set his feet, he still carries power with arm punches, and he's off balance doing all manner of things. So L-Dog says, I suppose if Ortiz could avoid Wilder's right hand for 6, Usyk could probably do it for 12. Who knows? But, hopefully we get to see some of these fights. And if it was for a unification, if Usyk can pick up a belt, all the better. So Teddy says, not the biggest Wilder fan, but he's getting bigger black kids into boxing. Also, they messed up marketing AJ. He could have really been a star over here. Well, if there's more people coming to boxing because of the exposure and the knockouts, and people see that there's a career path, that there's money to be made, because ultimately, let's face it, it's not just the glory people are seeking. It's, they want the paydays too. And if it can rival what's, other sports can pay, you'll get more people interested. Okay, I've just scrolled down by accident and missed about 50 comments. I'll just find my place here. Just a second. So we've got 62 in the chat. So thank you for joining the Boxing Squared live stream. Probably go for about another 20 minutes or so. It's coming up 12 past 11 here at night, wherever you are in the world. Hope you are doing well. Still can't find my place. Oh, there we go. Jeez, it just happens so quickly. You get so quickly behind. So Teddy says, we adopted a Jagba at Boxing Squared, and if Damani Rock was on PBC, he'd be that guy. The chatter on him is insane from fighters. Yeah, Damani Rock is a very talented fighter, but does he have the discipline out of the ring? And I don't mean like ill-disciplined in terms of behaviour, but does he live the life? I mean, his Instagram, there's more shots of him standing on steps and, on the sidewalk or leaning on cars than there is boxing stuff. If you see his Instagram, it's bizarre and like strangely bizarre for a boxer, and it's just almost exclusively street side shots in random locations. It's weird, but he's ballooned up in weight and fought, his most recent fight, he had come down a little bit. And that was the first time he sort of arrested that sort of... He just was going up and up and up. I think it was 287 or 289 for his second to last fight, and then he was 277 for his last one, which was good to see. But he needs to be around 250. He can't... He's not the Jarrell Miller type where he carries that and he doesn't look obese. He looks kind of at 270, 280. It's like sloppy fat type fighter. And he's got all the skills and he's got good pedigree. He can totally fight, but it just kind of feels like he's going nowhere fast. He's got good skills, but yeah, whatever's happened in terms of his promotion and who's looking after him, it doesn't feel like, because he's with Rock Nation, but he needs to be one of these guys that's signing some co-promotional deal somewhere to sort of get him out of the mire, because he seems to be going nowhere fast. So James says Huey looked quite content and relaxed at the presser, had a snack during the stare down. Well, that's the thing. Does he ever really look, perturbed? And, he kind of always looks like he's just, half a second away from falling asleep. But he needs to, perform in the ring. He's only 24 and actually he's 25 now, but it's one of these excuses that starts to wear a bit thin. He's been professional for so long now, and people can make arguments about, he's still growing into his body and man strength and that, but other elements of his game don't look to be improving. If anything, on some of them he just looks like he's regressing in some areas, and it just you never know what you're going to get with Huey Fury now, except that he probably won't throw enough punches. So John says, if AJ loses Hearn, is going to do everything he can to prize the WBO off the PBC platform. He will really push the Usyk Mando, as both Usyk and Parker are with Matchroom. Oh yeah, I can totally see that. They will try to get a belt where they can. And I'm sure if Joshua wins, Hearn will be trying to make a deal with the WBO for them to go after the IBF. Better believe that. So L-Dog says Cassius Chaney and Jermaine Franklin aren't promising either. Well, seems to be, there's some decent US heavyweights, but there's no one guy coming through. So David says they messed up the marketing by putting him in with a fighter he could not beat on his US debut. So this is of Joshua relating to the previous comment, an earlier comment I should say. Hindsight is 2020, but after the whole Miller thing, maybe they should have just pulled out, but from the sounds of it, it was just too big to fail, that they had to go through with it. And obviously there was a lot on the line for everyone, but yeah, it didn't work out, did it? So Adam Fahey says Chaney needs to step up. Yes, he does. There's too many guys that are rolling around that are closing in on 20-0 and not fighting anyone of note, but claiming they are the next big thing. So DJ Keaty says, an aggressive Huey Fury, don't hold your breath. Well, this is the thing. There's levels in terms of the opponents, and Pavel Sauer, for me, is a high-level journeyman, and Huey Fury's probably going to be able to do some things in there with Sauer that he can't with guys that are at a couple of cuts above. So John says, I'm with Boxing Squared. I want Dave Allen to retire. He's going to seriously injure himself if he carries on. Yeah, I mean, I guess that some of these conversations wouldn't happen if some of these guys weren't so vocal on social media. I mean, you can liken it to Lucas Brown and to some extent that no one knew that he was, had depression or whatever mental issues he had in the run-up to the Dillian White fight. He had a whole bunch of issues, but his social media portrayed the opposite. It was that everything was fine. He was trying to portray that he was training hard, when in reality he wasn't training much at all, wasn't training properly, and he was taking antidepressants. Whereas, so that was a curated social media account. Whereas someone like Dave Allen, no filter, and it's just all coming out. So we have more concern for him because he's giving us more information to be concerned about. So, I just wonder how many other boxers sort of in that Dave Allen mindset from one day to the next and are really struggling, but you just never know. So David says the heavyweight division is dead. Old man Foreman was a novelty, but now it's common to have 40-plus-year-old heavyweights right up there in the mix. Sad. I think about the division like this at the moment. We're in a transitional period from one sort of crop to the next. You've got the likes of... Okay, I think there was an ambulance or a cop car going past. You've got the likes of Povetkin, Ortiz, and Pulev. There's a couple of others that are, getting pretty long in the tooth now, and they're on the verge of retirement in the next, 6 months, year, 2 years. And there's these other guys coming through that are going to replenish them, and it's kind of the Olympic class of 2016. Pretty much all the guys that I listed earlier, Filip Hrgovic, Aslanbek Makhmedov, Tony Yoka, Joe Joyce, F.I. Jagba, Daniel Dubois, those guys who turned pro 2016, 2017, they're really coming through, and they're going to start taking the division over from about 2021. There is a handover period that's in process right now where it's all of a sudden it'll happen and the division looks very different. But it's sort of, I don't want to say the old hangers on, but there's some of these guys that are in the top 10 or top 20 who are one fight away from retirement. They get beat and they're gone. Like if Povetkin loses to Hunter, he's probably done. So Orbit Sap says Parker loses pace over the round. Usyk picks up the pace as the fight goes on. So Usyk probably wins on points. I could totally see that. Parker and Usyk, probably for the first 4 or 5 rounds, will be extremely competitive and probably share some rounds there. But could totally see, 6, 7, 8, 9, Usyk starting to sweep some of those rounds based on his activity, and Parker has a tendency to go into an energy sort of conserving mode, and maybe he starts going for broke in the later rounds. But it could, I think if I was to, even, I made no secret, Parker, being a countryman of mine and all that sort of stuff, he is my favourite heavyweight, but just looking at that style matchup and some of what Usyk can do, and that Parker doesn't necessarily have a vicious knockout punch, I don't think Usyk would... Sure, he's not going to just try wear punches from Parker, but compared to some other fighters, he's not going to worry about Parker's power as much. So the Quag says Unrivaled is a damn good channel. Scott says, if you don't like heavyweight boxing, you're on the wrong chat. This is a heavyweight channel after all. Sam says, you don't need a sleeping pill, just watch Hughie Fury. Oh, ruthless. Jason says, Hughie Fury will be heavyweight champion in a few years, probably snap up a belt one day, as he doesn't fight Tomato Ken all the time. He's still relatively young. Well, it could be like that for a number of heavyweights. If there's a situation in the next couple of years where belts fragment, you could be Johnny on the spot, like Joseph Parker when he fought Andy Ruiz, a vacant belt. Just, those situations pop up from time to time. Berman Stavern, vacant belt. Adam says, after Fujimoto, we need Daniel Dubois to fight fringe European or former world title challengers. Duopa Helenius would be good. Completely agree with that. Those are the sort of level that he needs to look for in 2021. So Frank Warren's probably going to have to cut some checks, maybe a little bit bigger than he'd like to, because they will make him pay. Duopa is going to fight Yoka, I think. Well, that's kind of been on the cards, but at the end of the day, if there's a bigger offer from someone, they'll chase the money. I mean, Johan Dorper knows it's a passing of the torch fight with Tony Yoka. He will want to get well paid in that one, but if there's a bigger paycheck out there, he'll take it. So David says, any of the gatekeepers from the Lennox era could easily become undisputed heavyweight champ right now. Don't necessarily agree with that. So L-Dog says, Joyce vs Dubois might be a good fight. And that feels like one that Frank Warren would like to make at some point, but maybe not in the next 6 months. Maybe it's in a year's time. I mean, technically at the moment you could sell that as a world title fight because Joyce has this gold title, but the problem is no one puts any stock in the gold title. But if one of them manages to pick up a strap and they're still in the same stable, you can believe that that'll be the first cab off the rank. So Todd says Usyk will have to show punching power at heavyweight for me to be a believer of him at heavyweight. I don't necessarily think it's about punching power or changing what he does. I think it's just going to be a case of him implementing what he does well. It's still going to be a handful for heavyweights, but he's got to be aware of what's coming back at him, and that some of the taller guys will have reach advantages. They will make it tough for him. Adam says the PED scandal and Yoka only fighting in France has really damaged his career. Well, it's interesting, the whole fighting in France thing. I mean, it's primarily, even though he sort of said he wants to fight in France to win a heavyweight title there, really it's primarily because he's got this deal with Canal, which is paying him a lot of money. So John says, I'm not surprised the promoters seem to push the rankings with the governing bodies. Hearn is happy with Parker and Usyk where they are with the WBO. Yeah, I mean, they will, if that fight becomes available and they can have that, one of them is going to have the belt, opens up opportunities after that as well for the number of fighters within Matchroom. So Adam says, Pulev sits on ice too much, needs challenging fights. We didn't look great against Rydell Booker. So Kojak says, hey to you too. Adam says, Yoka needs to look at ESPN Top Rank as can create so many fights there to calm Jennings, Cabial, to go along with the likes of Joyce from Queens. I guess some of it, I mean, remember France is a pretty decent sized country in terms of population. And he's the biggest fish in the pond there in terms of heavyweight boxing. He's on a pretty good wicket in terms of what he's earning. If Canal come back with some massive offer for him to extend what he's doing, I mean, remembering, what is he, about 7 or 8 fights into his career, if he picks up another sort of 6-fight deal, prize fighting after all. L-Dog says, Joyce has a solid chin, Dubois UD. Be interesting. I mean, it might even, I mean, we saw some weakness to the body from Joyce in the Jennings fight, which I found quite interesting. I mean, Dubois would be aware of that, and he's if you watch some of those fights this year, it was the Tete one, I think it was the Lati one, he really softened those guys up, especially Tete, to the body. It was left to the body and then straight upstairs, opened him up like a can of worms. So Jason says Usyk is way too busy for Wilder. That would present Wilder some problems, that's for sure. So Jens Scans for Tizen says, you saw how Spilker made a mockery of Wilder until the KO. Spilker is nowhere near Usyk's level, so the fight is really intriguing. What's that whole thing, can he go 12 rounds? Can he avoid being knocked out? It's the equation with some of these fights now, which makes it intriguing because we know Usyk is a top guy. Interesting with Spilker dropping down to cruiserweight. I think he's done and maybe should have retired, but he wants to have a crack at cruiser. Never a huge heavyweight, but he seems to have got down and made the weight okay. So Todd says Usyk isn't a combination puncher in the style of Ruiz. He's not as fast as Ruiz. Usyk doesn't stop Wilder. I'm no Wilder fan. I could see it more likely being a decision, but, I wouldn't mind that fight, that's for sure. So Todd says Dubois landed on Usyk, lost but done well. Corrupt Cop says, only one picking Wilder. The bloke is underrated. Tough. He sparks Usyk, the guy who got a black eye from Witherspoon. It'd be quite interesting because if Wilder did knock out Usyk, I think it probably changed some perceptions, but it might depend what does Usyk do in the division before he would actually, before he would get to that fight. Because it's not happening next. Probably not happening in the next year. L-Dog says, when Anatoly Lomachenko is in Usyk's corner, he does not get hit much. Look at the Gassiev masterclass. Richard says, who can keep Wilder out for a full 12 rounds? We know he carries power right through to round 12. Wilder would sleep Usyk. Scott 70 says Wilder will never fight Usyk. The Warrior says Wilder would sleep Usyk. L-Dog says Usyk has a decent chin. Lubak, Gassiev did rock Usyk, but Gassiev has sparked out heavyweights in sparring. L-Dog says, when has he been knocked down by a pro? I mean, yeah, lots of Usyk talk. Obviously a result is not guaranteed either way in a fight with Wilder, but yeah, sign me up if they can make that. So Ness says, Boxing Squared, did you happen to try discussing other weight class? Well, I've gone through this a number of times before on the channel. When I started the channel, I did a little bit of everything for a little while, but then I decided, one, it was primarily because of time issues. I mean, because I work full-time, etc., that I wanted to cover one weight class and do it well. So that's primarily why I've just covered heavyweight, because that was the division that I followed really closely and I guess you'd say cared the most about. But yeah, I follow but the other advantage, and for anyone who's heard this before, apologies, but it allows me to be a fan of all the other weight classes as well, watch the big fights, and if there is a down weekend for heavyweights and there's a lot of big other boxing on, I can be a fan like anyone else. It's great. It'll be quite busy next weekend though. There are 5 heavyweight fights on that Joshua card. I'm not sure how I'll have to break that down. I might have to just because if they're going to be back to back to back, it's going to be tough to record post-fight reviews all at once. So the Warrior says Wilder would sleep Usyk, you're playing. James says, how many pay-per-views Wilder versus Ortiz did? Good question. We'll find that out probably, when was the fight? So probably early next week. I mean, I think there was an expectation by a lot of people, 200 to 250,000 after when it was announced, but Fox did a good job of promoting it. So, who knows where it's gone. So Adam says, is Gassiev serving a drug ban we don't know about? Well, the stuff that's come out publicly has indicated injury, but, was it a right bicep injury or whatever it was? He aggravated again, so, leading Joey DeWeco to get really bent out of shape about it. But, yeah, I haven't heard anything, but if anyone does, let me know. So AZ says Huey has only been 22 for 3 years now. It's a boring excuse. Well, he is now 25, so it becomes hard to... And he's got, 20-odd fights. He's been a professional for a long time now. It becomes it's got to start putting it together. So UK Rob says, if Huey follows through on the promise of letting the right hand go, then I will be a lot happier thinking in. Okay, I'm not sure what you're meaning there, but... sometimes it's not necessarily letting the right hand go. We saw in the Pulu fight, that was all he was doing. The pieces just haven't quite fit. I'll be interested to see how he looks against Sauer, but that's an opponent that could make him look good and give people a false sense of security about his progress. So John says, from a purely marketing point of view, losing to Ruiz has been a massive success. If AJ beats Ruiz in devastating fashion, his stock will go up. I'm not saying AJ will win in devastating fashion. Well, to some extent, they're completely correct, because if he'd have beaten Ruiz, it would have been, seen as a decent win, but it was a late stand-in opponent. This is the first time I'm talking about. He would have got some credit, but maybe not a lot. But because of the massive upset on the scale that it was, it's made the rematch so much bigger. So maybe his star will ultimately, if he beats Ruiz, and if he did do it in devastating fashion, it would certainly rise off the back of it. So Adam says, guys who needs to step up: Farr 18-0, Cheney 18-0, Milas 15-0, Daniel Dubois 13-0. Yeah, I can't disagree. There's a number of guys. I actually did a some of you may well remember a contenders and pretenders video earlier this year, looking at 6 guys. Were they contenders or pretenders? And 2019 was when we needed to find out. About 4 of those guys haven't been in fights yet to actually prove it either way. Some of them are going to be, like Zhili Zhang. He's going to be in with Andrei Rudenko. Fujimoto is out next month, but Tom Schwartz was another guy that I had on my contenders or pretenders list, because the resumes were so thin, wafer thin. And Farr was another one. I mean, some of these guys may come through and be decent heavyweights, but some of the journeys and some of the the fights, and even some of the explanations about why they're fighting certain opponents, it doesn't add up sometimes, and it feels like forever and a day that some of these guys are going to be in fights that we'll be actually interested in, and sometimes they wonder why their profiles aren't big. Go figure. So George says, I wouldn't rush Daniel Dubois, a fine prospect. Wilder didn't come to prominence until 28. Dubois 21. Yeah, I mean, Warren, he knows how to build fighters. He's not going to rush Dubois into anything that he's not ready for, even though he probably could beat a number of top guys right now. There is a process that Frank Warren goes through, and he's, I think, number 6 in the WBO. He's slowly going to work him into that mandatory position. So, Usyk's the mandatory at the moment, so if he has his mandatory out of the way, mid next year or something like that, you could well see Dubois 2021 picking that up, being that guy. But they'll take opportunities elsewhere if they come. Dubois has now got rankings across the board. So Adam says 13-0 fighting Fujimoto next is a backwards fight. Fighting the Ghanaian heavyweight list isn't good either. Yeah, and this is the thing. Besides the Gorman fight, I mean, there was the Kajanu fight as well. I could live with that. The Gorman fight was a good one. That felt like that was going to be a competitive fight to some extent, but Dubois completely outclassed him, showing what a good prospect he was. But some of these other ones that have been set up, Lati, Tete, and then Fujimoto, I mean, he's clearing out some of the, perceived deadwood in the division, but, so we need to thank him for that. But at the same time, some of these guys are going to be, they're knockover jobs. When he needs to be in some of these fights, as was mentioned earlier, like a Hammer or a Duopa, guys that are durable and not necessarily going to beat him, but can take him some rounds and just, show him a few looks. And, yeah. So George says, whatever they do with Daniel, as long as they take their time, he will develop well. No rushing. Rushing leads to a loss by KO. And he's not 21 anymore, he's 22. I'm pretty sure he just had a birthday a couple months ago. So Scott says, George Michael, out of both your hits, which is your favourite? Asking for a friend. Ruthless. Adam says, the likes of Duopa, Helenius, Hammer, Kuzman, Dimitrenko. Is Dimitrenko, does he carry that same sort of value like the others may? Sort of felt like against Tony Yoka that he came to fall down. I sort of think that he's sort of drifted off that list now. So Will Magic Man says, Huey Fury, throw a right hand in round 1 and it lands in round 2. Oh. It'd be interesting, because if he looks average, the knives will be out for Hughie Fury more than they have been. There's a lot of people are down on Hughie Fury right now. At one time, very highly regarded, but those days, not a lot of love for him from fans right now. And George Michael has responded to Scott, my music can be interpreted by the ear of the listener. I'll let him decide. So Freedom, fight in 1, 2, 3. I don't think so. Parker is one of the best fighters to beat Usyk. Same things apply to Usyk as you said about Parker. I just sort of lean towards Usyk because of his work rate, and he can keep it up. Parker often starts fast, but then dials it back, and that has cost him rounds in big fights, especially through the middle of fights. We saw in the Dillian White fight, albeit the headbutt earlier in the fight, he did his energy saving mode, and against Anthony Joshua it was a bit the same. I think the difference in that fight is picking up some of those rounds, sort of 5 to about 9, and that I think would be enough for Usyk to shade a decision. It would be very competitive early on for the first 4 or 5 rounds, don't get me wrong, and I like the fight, but I think the stamina with Usyk's volume, it'd be hard to keep up the same work rate throughout. And this is what Usyk does. He just wears guys down, wears them into the dust. It's like a different version of Jarrell Miller, how he would just sort of, I guess there's a few questions about why Miller was able to do it, given his size, but he just ground people into the dust through his pressure and volume. Usyk does his work slightly in a different way, but it's, similarly effective. So Salty Sally says, what time will the Monaco card be on New Zealand time? I haven't checked. It'll be Sunday morning, so probably like 7 to 11, something like that. Skater says Marcellus Wilder will be the next Amir Khan if he keeps fighting. Chin is shot. Well, that's high praise for Marcellus Wilder if he can ever become a champion like Amir Khan did. 2 losses though for Marcellus Wilder at cruiserweight against limited opposition. It doesn't bode well for his career. So Jason says, I want Wilder to change my perception. I honestly do. Well, hopefully we see in the next 2 years, because this is going to be the making of and breaking of some of these top heavyweights that are running around right now, is the next 2 years, because they can't fight each other. Their legacies are going to look a little bit thin, and people will be asking the questions, why didn't the fights happen? And people will be blaming each other. The same normal sort of stuff we have to deal with. But if they go through and they don't at least each fight a couple of big names, really add to their resumes, the legacy question it starts to look a little bit thinner than it should. Wilder, Joshua, Fury, Ruiz, arguably guys like Pavek and Ortiz, Pulev, they're at the, maybe they won't be able to do too much more, but there's other guys like White, Miller, Kovnatsky, they will want to get in the mix too. Excuse me for a sec. I'll just have a sip of water. So Angus says, how much is the pay-per-view for Ruiz Joshua? Are you going to buy it? $34.95. Yeah, I generally buy all the pay-per-views just because you can't generally trust the stream sometimes. But it's always $34.95 New Zealand, which is, I think, in American money, about $20, something like that. Or if it's in the UK, it's about $15, $20, something like that. Not exactly, I'd have to work it out, but yeah, that's cheaper than most of the Joseph Parker pay-per-views that used to be on New Zealand TV. So Jason says, marks out of 10 for the December 7th card. 7, good main event, good co-main event, but, the rest of the heavyweight fights, not necessarily, on paper at least, going to be competitive. I think Hrgovic starches Molina easily enough. Wok, he's pretty shot. White will have no issue getting a win there. The other one, Magomedov versus Tom Little. Little's coming in shape. Majidov was dropped in his first fight, and counter to some people who are saying this is his first heavyweight fight. It's not. This is, he's already fought before in the division. So that maybe that could be a bit of a a sneaky good one to watch. Maybe Little is able to carve something out, but it should be a win to Medvedov. Just trying to work out where I was here. Just a second. Okay, I'm slowly catching up on the chat. Apologies if I haven't got to your question. So Fat Apple says, hi Boxing Squared, what do you make of Rick Glazer saying Wilder Ortiz is tracking at 2,500 pay-per-views? Are you sure you didn't leave off an O there, or is this a hilarious meme type tweet? Geez, if it was 2,500, wow. I think it would be more like 250,000 or 200, but if it's less than 200, I think it will be seen as a bit of a failure. So Lubak says Rick Glazer is quite accurate with his analysis. I expect Ortiz Wilder will do about 200,000, says Lubak 77. So Sam says, need to get to work. Thanks, Boxing Squared. Greeting from Tunisia. Have a great one. Well, thank you for listening from Tunisia, Sam. Appreciate it. So the Kinsey Thompson network, KTN network, Huey Fury's problems are physical strength, and he doesn't get full extension on the straight right. He loops it. Yeah, I was just thinking he doesn't have a straight right. It's this arcing right hand, but it's deceptive against guys of, remember the fight against Sam Sexton. There was a lot of people talking up that right hand, and I think after it, and I think Fury fell in love with it to a little bit, to some extent, and we could see it look impressive again against Pavel Sauer, but it's not a great opponent. So John says Frank doesn't have the money to pay those sensible step-up fights for Daniel Dubois, hence the weak opposition. Well, I can live with, it's not great, but I can live with some of the, there's a couple of decent fights this year, and there's been a bit of dross in between, and I can live with that. But next year, he needs to, when he'll be 14-0 entering the year, he needs to start stepping it up. So Lubak says it's stagnated at 2,500 pay-per-view buys. If it reached 25,000, it would be a miracle, let alone 250Ks. I would be shocked if it was 25,000 or lower. That would just blow my mind. So Boxing Squared, remember when Homono KO'd Fujimoto? That overhand right was a peach, especially from a former Manly Seagulls player. Well, I think we should start closer to the time. We might have to do a little in-chat pool about what actually happens in that fight and how many seconds it goes. Because I think if it went half a round, that would probably impress me. I think it's going to be an occasion where the first big punch that Dubois lands, Fujimoto will fold like a deck chair on the Titanic and go down and down badly. I think he will just come out and just be on his bike immediately, running the 100-meter sprint around the ring. Lubak says Huey Fury needs more strength and conditioning training and work on his power. Yeah, but someone of that build, maybe that just is who he is, and no matter amount of gym work and other bits and pieces, maybe he's always going to be that sort of, wiry sort of build in his upper body. So Corrupt Cop says Daniel will bury the Japanese heavyweight this time. He certainly will. When I heard that was made, because I could understand Fujimoto fighting someone that's maybe an established heavyweight but not necessarily a top 50 fighter. He's been fighting guys that are like way out of the top 100. The guy that he last fought twice actually in the past year was a former middleweight. So that sort of shows you where his ambition has been at. But stepping into the ring, Frank Warren probably did actually pay, in terms of what Fujimoto's used to, probably decent money. And if he's taking it, it feels to me a complete cash out. So Adam says, Corrupt Cop, I was going to go, but no point when I was see 45 seconds Fujimoto, including the count. Yeah, it becomes an issue. If Dubois is going to knock the guy out in one round, does it put you off completely? I know I've spoken to Adam Fahey, on Twitter about it, and yeah, he's gone to a number of fight cards, but if you have to travel across, the city, or you have to travel there a couple of hours by train, and it's going to be a weak card with a weak main event, it's not going to help. But yeah, let's hope for better for Daniel Dubois in 2020. I don't want to sort of dwell on that. And Lubak says Fujimoto might get seriously injured. Yeah, he could. He totally could. So Noah says, delete the name Charles Martin from Boxing Talks unless he's in the merchandise booth. So the KTN network says, also what you need to consider is a lot of prospects can't step up because as the home fighter, you pay for the event and the opponent, etc. Gatekeepers demand a bigger purse. And this is some of the trouble I think Frank Warren's running into as well. Even though we might look at a Fujimoto and some of these other guys, the amount others will be asking to face Daniel Dubois will probably be eye-watering for their talent level, that they know no one else wants to get in the ring with him. So Frank Warren may be paying over the odds anyway for these guys we have no interest in seeing. So John says Marcellus Wilder is the living definition of chat shit, get banged. Angus says that left hook from Long, though, on Marcellus Wilder was brutal. Yeah, he sort of switched up to southpaw, and it was sort of just a short chopping. Yeah, it didn't look like he'd put everything into it, but it hit the mark. UK Rob Boxing says Marcellus is boxing for the wrong reasons. Well, I hope that recent loss puts to bed any talk from Deontay Wilder fighting his brother, which he'd spoken about, desire to fight him at one point in his career, and how great that would be to see two brothers fighting. No one wants to see that fight, especially now. So John says Povetkin Hunter is a really good fight. Agree. Lubak says Kabial versus Takam would be interesting. Agree. Angus says, I thought Chris Arreola gave him his best fight. That was an interesting one. I was hoping for better from Adam Kovnatski against Chris Arreola, because at this point Chris Arreola is well on the slide. UK Rob says £5 increase here for the pay-per-view. I've noticed a lot of people saying since Dillian White joined the card, that's why it's increased by £5. But Dillian White's not. I mean, to think about it like this: say if they do 1 million pay-per-views and you've got that £5 extra, that's $5 million. They're not paying, or £5 million. They're not paying Dillian White anything near £5 million. He's probably going to get pretty short money considering, it's the opponents. He might be, in the context of his name and the marquee value, which is down at the moment, I might add. He's probably taken a massive haircut on his pay cut. What he normally gets paid, and it's not a huge fight on the card in terms of it's not a co-main event, it's not the main event. I don't buy into the sort of because White's there and all these other guys are here. This was always going to generate a huge amount of money through pay-per-views and other bits and pieces. They're just trying to make as much as possible, and it's probably also trying to, because the stadium's 16,000 people, they can only generate so much. They can increase the revenue through the pay-per-view. And obviously Sky's probably gone along with this, going, well, we're collecting whatever they collect off each pay-per-view, clipping the ticket. Everyone is here to make some money, and in the case that Joshua loses, well, they've made as much as possible. So Fat Apple says Marcellus's career is over now. He once said to Bellew, I will beat you in the ring. Yeah, that statement hasn't aged well, has it? So UK Rob says the infamous Rick Glazier wrote 2,500. He has lost all credibility for a while now. 2,500. That would really surprise me. So George Michael says KTN Network is a serious content producer. Great stuff. I actually used to watch his old channel and forgive me if I got the name wrong, I think it was Jordan Henderson. I think that was the old channel before he became the Kinsey Thompson Network. So Lou Buck says Mike Coppinger will likely say, "Wow, the Ortiz got 600,000 buys." It will be interesting to see what floats around, because it becomes hard to trust the numbers, and especially when they vary so much. And I'm not saying this is going to be 2,500 to 600,000 range, but yeah, even a range of 100 or 150,000, that's a huge amount and makes a massive difference. John says Huey should look at how Kovali generates power if he wants to improve his power. I mean, let's just talk about this for a second, and I'll try to catch up to the comments when I can get to it. Huey Fury, 3 losses in 3 years. If he steps up to another world level type of fight in 2020, that would represent 4 world level fights in 4 years. And if he lost that, is it time to talk about a new trainer or a new sort of setup? Because clearly something to this point hasn't been working, and another loss would confirm that. You know, Fury's got some talent but can't stick it together. And I know that Huey Fury would never voluntarily leave his father, but would that be the best thing if he has another loss or two? So Ness says, "Wow, Boxing Squared, I was well informed and educated. Thanks, sir. Big ups." Big ups for joining the weekly live stream every Friday night, 9:30 New Zealand Standard Time, wherever you are in the world. So 66 in the chat at the moment. I said 2 hours. It's already 2:20. We'll go for 10 more minutes. I'll really try to whip through this. It's bearing down on midnight here, so I'm starting to fade a little bit. Fat Apple says, "You have the report, Rob. I heard Fury Wilder was low 200k pay-per-views and was not what approximately projected, which I believe was 325,330. Sometimes these numbers come out and you have the number, but if there is adjustments or if it was inflated, how would we ever know or find out?" So Angus says, "Imagine Fujimoto knocks out Daniel Dubois in the first round and wins the world title that he's been ranting about. If he beats Daniel Dubois in the first round, I will close my channel. But it has to be legitimate. He has to have knocked out Daniel Dubois, not through some form of injury. But yeah, I would just be flabbergasted if he could land a punch against Daniel Dubois of note. If you watch that, and it's available on Dailymotion, Fujimoto versus Sutat Kalalek, it's a dreadful fight. And that former middleweight was putting it on Fujimoto at times. So John says, Dillian is the only on the Saudi card to keep busy. Hearn wants to keep him active whilst the UCAD process is going on. It's nothing to do with the £5 increase. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it is either. So John says, you need to read my previous statement. Gym work is not the best way for Huey to improve his power. He should concentrate on technique. Isn't that what they've been doing for ages now? So the KTN network says, George Michael, thanks. I box at amateur level 9-1. It helps with my YouTube stuff at Boxing Squared. That's right, my name is Jordan Henderson, but I named my channel after my grandparents. And so if you haven't checked out his channel, he does some very good content, and he pumps it out too. So yeah, the Kinsey Thompson network. So I think you've shortened it to KTN. Do check him out. So Todd says, no, if Huey Fury loses again, retire. Not trainer's fault. He just hasn't got it. Well, sometimes a change of scenery, especially if he's been training under just the tutelage of Peter Fury for so long, maybe it could be good for Huey Fury. But I wouldn't think he'd just throw it in, pack it in, because of another loss. He's only 25 years old at the moment. Another loss, he might be 26. He could still have a full 10 years to go after another loss. So Fat Apple says, what was the report, Rob, or are you tight-lipped? We know most of the tickets for Wilder Ortiz Gate were slashed by 80%, with tickets from $500 to $100, and in the end, most tickets were given away. Yeah, boxing is a murky sport with some of the financials and comp tickets, and when the fight hasn't sold well because it's almost pitch black in the arena, And we're seeing that a lot. And as some of these American fights, I'd be interested to know why it's not resonating at some of these boxing events, especially in like Las Vegas, why they're not resonating as much as they previously had. Like that Canelo fight was, selling 10,000 tickets. Was it just the price? Was it the fight? Was it a combination of all things? Or there's just too much other competition at the moment for sports and people's attention? Because it's a small world these days with a lot going on. So the report has no breakdown of the tickets sold, comps, etc. Gate generated 3.3 million. Actually, yeah, Rob has sent me some details of that. I've looked at some of the stuff Rob has sent me. It was interesting reading. They'd redacted quite a few details, which was disappointing. So John says Peter Fury doesn't teach his fighters how to generate power through technique. Wilder and Kovalev generate their power from technique, not physical strength. Well, I mean, you could make the argument that does there need to be another voice there? That's what I was just getting at with Hughie Fury. We've seen he can't seem to settle on a style and a way of fighting, and some of that could be the opponent that's put in front of him, but he isn't looking confident in the way that you would think that he could be or should be at this point. So KTN Network says to beat Wilder is to stay on his chest. The way to beat Fury, I think, is to stay on the outside and make him come to you. To beat Joshua, you have to apply pressure, and to beat Ruiz, jab, jab, grab. Okay, well, I've caught up on the chat. We're 2 hours 25 in. I might call it a day, or we'll call for last comment. So if you desperately have anything else you want answered, drop it right now and we'll quickly get to it in the next couple of minutes. I'll just check my list. I think I've gone through everything. Yeah, we have. I guess 2.5 hours, you start to cover quite a bit of ground. But we're 1 week away from a pretty significant rematch, and the fighters both there in Saudi Arabia, arriving over 10 days before the fight. It's going to be interesting. That stadium, I thought that looked pretty good. That was constructed awfully quickly, and the press release with all the details, it was quite impressive actually what they've done. And now they're doing that final piece with the ring and the sort of bits and pieces that go around it with the lighting towers, yada yada yada, all that sort of stuff, big screen up top. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a very, very good event. And there's some other heavyweight boxing on the way, as I mentioned earlier. Arslanbek Makhmadov will be returning next week as well, December 7th. So Fat Apple says, see you, Adam Fahey. Yeah, Adam Fahey, he said, cheers, BS, I'm out. Have a good day. He's in the UK at the moment. He is from New Zealand, currently living in the UK. Very good cricketer. Lubak says, I think John Fury is old school and needs to modernise his coaching. So Jade Louise Tidman says, much love, Kevo. Fat Apple says, who would you like Junior Farr to fight next? Anyone with a pulse. I need him to, for me, I just think it's overdue. He's had a couple of issues this year, but he needs to step it up. Kyotaro Fujimoto versus Upper Tutupu is a horrible fight. Fujimoto looks horrendous. Yeah, a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of good, of the footage of the fights that's around. Some of them are not great. And it was a brutal knockout against Homono back in 2012. And really, he's gone into hibernation work since then. So Cash for Cat says, thank you for the great show. Well, thank you for being here. 60 in the chat still. We'll wrap it up in a minute. Final comments, and if you want something to be answered. So True says, oh, welcome True. If White was fighting in my back garden, I'd close the curtains. Ruthless. Junior Farr needs to fight Kevin Johnson. He got dropped by Gwyn. I'd hope they'd be going for a little bit higher than Kevin Johnson at this point. Devin Vargas kind of represented that kind of Kevin Johnson type gatekeeper, and the fact it was so competitive with Vargas, who, I mean, has been beaten pretty handily by other fighters. That was the first time in a loss that he went the distance. Had been knocked out the other times. It was a very good fight, very entertaining fight, but I thought Farr should have dominated a bit more. So the KTN network says, nice stream, I'll tune in again. Thank you for coming here. And if you haven't checked out the Kinsey Thompson network, please do so. Great content. Fat Apple says, Dominic Gwyn dropped Farr. Yeah, he did. I've actually, if you search my channel, I've got some highlights of that fight. That was some stuff that Junior Fast streamed, and I've got up on the channel. Left hook dropped him, and that was a punch that he struggled with in the Vargas fight. Got clipped with the left hook a number of times. So Todd says the stadium looks great. May the best man win. Yeah, we'll talk about this next week. So Jade Louise Tidman says, we love you, Boxing Squared, and I love you back. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. I'll knock it off there. So Timothy's just joined the chat. He says, I missed the show. Big up to you, and good luck to AJ. Yeah, and Jade says, everyone smash the like button. If you could please do so on the way out, that would be much appreciated. Okay, so we'll leave it there, but thank you for joining the chat. It's almost bang on 2.5 hours, 60 in the chat, wherever you are, morning, noon or night. Thank you for being part of the weekly live stream. I always intend for this to be about an hour long, and it just blows out, but there's a lot of back and forth with the comments, and obviously if I cover about 10 topics, it just chews up the time. But thank you for making this another enjoyable stream, and until next week, I bid you adieu, take care, and we'll talk about the big fight next week. Catch you later.